Emily saw it. You know, you were at a restaurant bar planning a trip with another woman. Oh, I see. And so what? Even when caught cheating, my husband Donald wouldn't drop his defiant attitude. In a moment, what we had built over 15 years crumbled away. In this day and age, I was a full-time homemaker, living with his parents just like every other year. I had given up the job I loved at a publishing company where I felt fulfilled, and now I spent half of the week accompanying my parents to the hospital and adjusting meals according to everyone's schedule. I was living the life much like a housemaid. After getting married, I had no time for myself. The only place I could relax was in our bedroom, even in this spacious house. Despite all this, I had chosen this life because I wanted to be with my husband. The option of leaving never crossed my mind, so when my adulterous husband said, "We can get a divorce, you know," I was at a loss for words, feeling more amazed than angry. This is the story of me, Sophie Johnson, turning 40 this year, leaving my husband Donald after 15 years of marriage, and starting my life from scratch. It all began 2 months ago on the 25th. That day was payday for Donald, who worked at an electronics manufacturer. Usually, his salary would be deposited into our joint account. I would use that money to pay our monthly bills and give him an allowance in the evening. However, 2 months ago, his salary wasn't deposited into our joint account. I thought there must have been some technical glitch, so when he got home in the evening, I asked him about it. "What do you mean you changed the deposit account without saying anything to me?" He had switched the account to his personal one. "But what about our payments? These bills are due on the 27th. I couldn't keep up with a sudden change and just thought of immediate concern. "Just let me know how much you need, and I'll transfer that amount into the joint account," he said, taking off his suit with his back turned to me. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes. "So why did you change it?" I couldn't think of any reason. In the 15 years we've been together, we had never changed the account. We were saving in our joint account, so it wouldn't be a problem if his transfer was late. It's not that our bills would fall behind. Maybe I didn't need to press the issue, but I couldn't help wondering. Why didn't he trust me with our finances? Did I do something wrong? I didn't remember overspending, but I thought maybe I had unknowingly upset him. If so, I needed to apologize. That's what I thought when I asked him. But it seems like he thought I was blaming him. He threw his freshly removed shirt onto the couch and glared at me. "It's my hard-earned money, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. But why do I need your permission to use it?" What? I couldn't understand any of his words. I've been giving him a $500 allowance every month, but that was just a temporary arrangement. If his expenses piled up, I would give him more. I asked him what he spent his money on, but I'd never refused to give him more when he needed it. As a stay-at-home wife, there have been times when I asked if I could buy something I wanted, but the reverse never happened. "I don't need dinner today." "What?" "But I already prepared." "Never mind, I'll eat out." He got bent out of shape, grabbed his car keys, and went out again. He seemed strange. For the past 15 years, we've never had issues over money. But suddenly, he starts saying it's his money, while cleaning up the food I had prepared. I was upset at my husband's selfish actions. I was frustrated that despite having food at home, he chose to eat out anyway because now he was in charge of the finances. From that moment, he began eating out every night and coming home late at night after I fell asleep. Also, the number of days he told me he was staying at work overnight increased. The fight had completely escalated. Even when we were together, we didn't talk more than necessary. As time passed, it was hard to find a chance to make up, and I started blaming myself. We'd never had a fight last this long before. It was a minor issue that he changed the bank account without consulting me. If he wants to manage the finances, that's fine. After about 2 weeks of awkwardness, I began to reconsider like that. Then one day, I received a message from Emily, who was my colleague when I worked at the publishing company. "Hey, how are you doing? How about lunch soon?" Emily's message was a welcome surprise. We used to go out for drinks after work and spend our days off together when we were single. Now, with families of our own, we didn't contact each other as much but still tried to meet at least once or twice a year. Her invitation came at a good time, and I agreed readily. 2 days later, in the afternoon, we were sitting in a cafe in the next town. "So they moved into the care facility, huh?" "Yeah, both of them in the same place." Emily asked how things were going, and I told her about my parents-in-law moving into a nursing home a few months ago. "I know I shouldn't say this, but it's a good thing. It must be a relief for you." She looked pleased, knowing how much I had been struggling to find time for myself. She seemed relieved now. Well, I do have to get their clothes, visit, and accompany them to their doctor's appointments, but still, my life has become a lot easier. This was the first time since I was single that I was able to casually make time to meet with a friend. You're such a dutiful daughter-in-law. Is Donald still hands-off? Yes, he seems to want to do nothing on his days off. He never wanted to go anywhere on his days off. In these 15 years, we've never even gone shopping together. Her husband is diligent. He picks her up in his car when it rains and sometimes even does the shopping for her. He never changed at all. Well, since I am a stay-at-home wife, he could at least take care of his own parents. Emily never thought highly of my husband. When we got married, we both had jobs, but he never helped with the household chores. On days when I was too tired to do housework, he found it unbelievable and suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. I didn't want to quit, but I resigned as he suggested, becoming a full-time homemaker. Soon after, I was asked to live with his parents, and I ended up taking care of them. The reason I couldn't talk back to my husband was because of the significant difference in our incomes. He is 8 years older than me, already held a position at his company, and his income was more than double mine. Can you earn as much as I do? If you can, I wouldn't mind quitting. He'd say things like that, leaving me speechless. I had discussed my true desire of not wanting to quit my job with Emily, even crying on the phone, overwhelmed by having no time for myself. I understand why she holds a negative view of him. It's because of my venting. After a while, the warm vegetable salad we ordered arrived. As she served it on smaller plates, she spoke again. So, how are things with him? Upon being asked, I thought for a while and nodded affirmatively. I had actually come to discuss our big fight, but I didn't want him to be seen in a worse light. Emily paused, holding the serving tongs, and stared at me as I managed only to nod and smile, trying not to arouse suspicion. She stopped serving the salad midway. I'm sorry I asked it in the wrong way. Sophie, things aren't going well with him, are they? Emily's words made it seem like she knew something. I was left flustered and unable to respond as she started talking about something that had happened a few days ago. She recounted being at a dining bar near her office for a work after party. While heading to the restroom, she passed a man in the aisle who turned out to be my husband. He didn't seem to recognize her, so she decided against calling out to him. But noticing that he was in casual clothes made her wonder if he was with me. After leaving the restroom, she decided to take a look at where he was seated. What she saw was him having drinks with a woman who wasn't me. It hit me instantly. He's cheating on you. They were sitting close together, bodies touching as they drank. Was that really my husband? I couldn't believe it. He hadn't come home that day due to working overtime, so there was no reason for him to be in casual clothes. Moreover, he seemed genuinely busy lately. Did he even have the time for cheating in his current state? Although we've been on bad terms recently, I couldn't imagine him resorting to cheating. I just don't see him as that kind of person. Sensing my thoughts, she sighed and added, for the upcoming long weekend, he mentioned going to a place in Malibu. He was showing information about the accommodations on his phone and mentioned something about a prime-grade steak dinner. You could probably find the hotel if you search from there. She started searching for the hotel on her phone, while at the cafe I was still hoping it was just her misunderstanding. However, as soon as I got home, I started looking through his clothes. I don't remember how many clothes he has, so I wouldn't know how many of what item were missing, but I did notice that 2 or 3 of his favorite clothes were missing. Until last year, he would immediately wear them after washing, and they were always at the front of the drawer when opened. But now, they were nowhere to be found, even after searching every corner, the back of the closet, and the drawers of rarely used cabinets, literally everywhere. The only thing that came to mind was him working overtime and even on weekends due to his busy schedule, telling me he had spent a night in the company's restroom because he missed the last train. As I stood in front of the closet, the sound of an incoming email came from my pocket. It was a message from Emily. The email included the URL of a hotel in Malibu. As I stood there in a daze, I slowly pressed the link, and a stay plan with a dinner including prime-grade meat was displayed. I felt dizzy, like I was having a bad dream. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe in him, but not finding his favorite shirt was a huge blow. 2 days later, the Saturday before a long weekend, he was unusually at home, working with the TV on. I placed a cup of coffee near his computer and casually asked, I haven't seen you wearing your favorite t-shirt this year. Even though he hadn't taken his eyes off the display when I put down his drink. At this question, the sound of him typing on the keyboard suddenly stopped. Then he said, "Yeah, I'll wear it sometime. making a point of looking at me as he responded. That was unusual. For the past month since that payday, he had been distant, but now, when asked about his shirt, he was making eye contact. I looked for it but couldn't find it, I added, trying to gauge anything from his reaction. He replied, "Isn't it somewhere?" and then looked away, returning to his computer. His reaction made me feel suspicious. Despite mentioning his missing favorite shirt, he showed no signs of being troubled. Normally, in such situations, he would pretend to be troubled just to emphasize that I hadn't taken care of it properly, even if he didn't really need it. Last year, he kept complaining just because it hadn't dried due to the rain. Every change seemed suspicious when it came to him. I couldn't control myself. I had to keep digging until I got clear answers, even if it meant going too far. "You're off for a long weekend, right?" Even though we hadn't reconciled after our last fight, I couldn't help but ask something more intrusive. "Work from when?" "I don't know. There's a business trip. I might have a day off." Was this also a lie? It seemed like it. After all, for the past 15 years, he always took time off during the holidays. Emily's words crossed my mind. Going to Malibu, as she said, mentioned the prime grade steak. Of course, as she also said, the story I heard at the cafe started to feel real, and I felt a surge of anger welling up within me. Before I realized it, I had said it out loud. "Business trip? You mean you're going to Malibu?" Uttering a word that I hadn't asked about, he who had been looking at the screen froze. He slowly turned around, but his expression had changed from earlier. With a weary face, he squinted and glared at me. It was the exact same look he had during our fight on that payday. What the hell is going on? Really rummaging around our room pretending to look for clothes? He sighed heavily. Hearing his words, my lips quivered noticeably. Indeed, I had rummaged through the room, but I found nothing. I couldn't find the t-shirt. Yet despite that, he said it, rummaged through his room. He said so, which means if I had rummaged more, I would have found something that linked to Malibu. I still wanted to believe even while doubting. Emily says she saw it at the wine bar. You and another woman were planning a trip. The things we had built started to crumble away. Oh, is that so? I thought. At times like this, he would hardly make an excuse, but reality was different. He was not flustered at all. He turned away with a defiant look. So what's the point? I was even questioned in return. What does he want to hear? When I became speechless out of disbelief, he piled on words. Who do you think you are? I'm working hard to earn money, enough for a stay-at-home wife to live comfortably. He yelled at me loudly and my head started to ache. I placed a hand on my forehead and took a deep breath. I'm okay with getting a divorce, He uttered those few words. For the past 15 years, no matter what happened, no matter how hard it was, I had tried not to think about it. I was disappointed that he could say it with no hesitation. From that day, he continued to ignore me. Even worse, the moment he found out I knew it, he boldly started communicating right in front of me, like, "All right, I'll pick you up at 7 in the morning." The first time it happened, I was dumbfounded. Was he always like this? The person in front of me was a total stranger. As the long weekend and the day of his trip approached, I found myself in the car driven by Emily, silently witnessing his infidelity unfold before my eyes. "Sophie, did you get a shot of him putting his arm around her waist just now?" "Yeah. You should take as many photos as you can." "Okay." When I recounted my conversation with him on Saturday to Emily, she was furious and urged me to break up with such a foolish man. She also suggested that I take photos as proof of his cheating and claim for emotional damages. She spent her much-anticipated weekend for this very purpose. The woman he was cheating with was around her late 20s or early 30s, with a slim figure and wearing revealing clothes. Did he have a thing for her long hair? He stroked her hair over and over with a gentle smile on his face. Since he left the house, I promptly followed and watched everything. From when he picked her up from her apartment, even when he stopped by a convenience store to buy breakfast together, to when they started walking arm in arm in front of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Now, they just entered a hotel together. I took pictures of all of it with my phone, but each time I pressed the shutter, I pondered over what I was doing. I knew it, but seeing it with my own eyes made me really sad. But I didn't shed a tear. I just stared at his joyful face. That was my day. What do we do now? Shall we stay somewhere for the night? No, let's head back. It seemed she was planning to stay overnight, but I shook my head. I didn't want to waste the money I've saved by scrimping on such a thing. I thought our life as a couple had finally started after my in-laws had been placed in a nursing home. We hadn't been able to go on trips until now because we always took care of our parents first, but from now on, we wanted to create memories as a couple. The money I had planned to use for those times, I wonder if I just wasted 15 years. If I knew it would turn out like this, I wouldn't have married. If I knew I would go through this, I would have divorced him a long time ago. I shouldn't have had to endure and try so hard. Today, seeing his smile for the first time in a while, I wanted to redo those 15 years, though I wanted to cry. I couldn't help but keep sighing. She had been quietly listening, but suddenly she started the car engine and checked the time. What time is it now? After 3 o'clock. Then she made a call and smiled at me. Hey Sophie, let's move out right now. Ha! Hello, sorry to bother you during the long weekend. I appreciate your help. I was taken aback by her sudden proposal. She seemed determined to start something. Panicked, I shook my head at her while she was on the phone, but she ignored me and continued, saying, "It's all good." From that moment, Emily was full of energy. While driving, she used her car's navigation system to call various places and gather people to come to my house. About 3 hours later, we actually arrived home in the evening. About 2 hours after that, but within just 1 hour, all my belongings in the house were packed into cardboard boxes. It was truly unbelievable. I didn't want to talk about work since you didn't want to quit, Sophie, but I've transferred from a fashion magazine and now I'm the editor-in-chief of a local magazine. In the car, she made various calls to the moving company, real estate agency, and even to a lawyer who knows Donald. She expertly adjusted the schedule so that the Certus people's visiting times did not clash. I followed her instructions meticulously. Minute by minute, I packed only my valuables into a box, leaving the rest to be handled by the movers. The real estate agent introduced me to a house that could be moved into within a few days. Meanwhile, my belongings were sent to her house, and I ended up staying with her for a few days. After the truck packed with my things left, I was visited by a lawyer who provided advice on claiming alimony after divorce, guiding me towards the least burdensome method. I was amazed at how much could be accomplished in just a few hours. I knew she was a very proactive person from our time working together, but her efficiency was truly remarkable. However, as I looked around the now half-empty room, anxiety slowly began to creep in. He's definitely going to be mad. The cost of moving was surprisingly low. The studio apartment was affordable, and even the consultation with the lawyer was free, yet it still required money. I made these decisions without consulting him. I'm sure he'll be furious when he gets back from his trip. As I felt our relationship deteriorating rapidly, I became depressed. Then she slapped my back. Hey, being a homemaker is a respectable job too. The money you've saved from being frugal is also yours. Plus, it's his fault. He said he'd transfer the necessary money, right? So let's have him pay even for the cost of living on your own. After being strongly persuaded by her, I took one last look around the house. I remembered how in the early days I had found it difficult to rearrange things. Now, I realized I had placed my toner on the bathroom vanity without hesitation. The shoe rack was filled with my shoes. I had always seen myself as a maid, but maybe I had actually become part of the family. After imprinting the image of the home I had lived in for 15 years in my mind, I made up my mind and nodded vigorously at her. Then, on the last day of the long weekend, I left the house I had shared with him. I was still staying at Emily's place. "Where are you at?" I picked up the call from him with a trembling hand. He asked that with a grumpy voice. Without answering his question, I said the words Emily and I had decided on beforehand. "You said you were okay with a divorce, right? And that you would transfer the necessary money. I am divorcing you. Please provide for the costs of me living alone." "What? Stop talking nonsense and come back." He seemed to think this was just a runaway. I cut off his voice and spoke my final words. "Please have your new partner take care of your parents from now on. Thank you for 15 years. While he was still talking, I hung up. He called back several times, but I didn't pick up. I did feel guilty about how I ended things unilaterally like this, but looking back, I had always accepted his unilateral demands ever since we got married. So I tried to think it is fine, at least in the last moment. The following year was a whirlwind. I negotiated with him through a lawyer and finally secured a divorce with alimony and living expenses assured. Finding peace of mind was a struggle until I landed a job as an office clerk at a local factory, slowly building my life with my monthly salary. "Sophie, can you make the deadline this month?" "Yeah, I'll make it, but I think I'm going to barely make it by the deadline, so I don't have time to chat on the phone." All right, I'll go now. You have your piece this month too. 6 months ago, Emily, who manages our local magazine, added a new section about saving money, and as a frugal person, I've been given a chance to write a couple of pages there every month. I gave up on my dream to work in a publishing company. Her arrangements mean a lot to me. Now I'm a writer, but I have 15 years of experience in budgeting as a homemaker, and I want to share my experiences wholeheartedly. I was able to make a fresh start. Then an unexpected call came in. It's good to hear your voice. Sounds well. Mother-in-law. My mother-in-law called me from her nursing home. I had said my goodbyes to her before my divorce, but in that time, I couldn't talk with her well. I hadn't contacted her since the last time, so I was surprised that she called. After talking about my father-in-law's advanced dementia, she updated me on my ex-husband's situation. What? He broke up? Yes, that's the case. He's foolish, isn't he? Between us, he was dumped before the divorce was finalized. I see. Seems like his relationship with that woman has already ended. Well, that's expected, isn't it? Any young girl would run if she had to deal with taking care of seniors. So who is at the home now? Donald. He ended up leaving his big corporate job, but he's trying with his complaints. He's such a fool. He was able to work because of his wife supporting him behind. He still doesn't talk about his own infidelity. Sophie, breaking up with him was the right thing to do. My ex-husband hasn't changed, but it seems like he's struggling a bit. I found myself a bit relieved by hearing that. My usually stern mother-in-law chuckled and said, Sophie, thank you. I was planning to ask you to try again with him when I called, but your voice sounds so lively, so I decided not to ask. In the roughly 15 years we lived together, I'd never had such a long conversation like this with my mother-in-law. Our relationship wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. I listened to her voice. I assumed this would be the last time I'd hear from her, and I savored every word. It turned out for the best, she said so sadly, and my tears welled up. It's been a year since my divorce. Everything has been going well, and I've managed to make a fresh start. However, I've always felt a lingering sense of regret. It's because I felt that I had wasted 15 years of my life. But then, with this phone call, my mother-in-law said it, thank you, and that she had planned to ask me to try again with her son. There's no chance of getting back together with my ex-husband, but hearing that from his mother made me genuinely happy. It felt like a validation of what I had done for those 15 years. I will never forget this phone call from her. Those 15 years were not wasted because now I believe that so.
I was always the other daughter. The one who didn't need constant attention. While my younger sister Sarah battled asthma, I battled invisibility in our own home. Every morning started the same way, Mom rushing to Sarah's room to check her breathing, while I got myself ready for school. Sarah, honey, how are you feeling today? Let me check your temperature, Mom would say, her voice dripping with concern. Don't forget your inhaler. Do you want me to call Dr. Thompson? I remember standing in the doorway, already dressed and ready for school, watching this daily ritual. My lunch was always whatever I could throw together myself, usually just a sandwich and an apple. Sarah got specially prepared meals with all her favorite foods. Dad wasn't much different. He worked extra hours to pay for Sarah's medical bills, and when he was home, his attention went straight to her. How's my little fighter doing? He'd ask, completely passing by me on his way to Sarah's room. The pattern continued year after year. While Sarah went from specialist to specialist, I learned to take care of myself. I did my homework without help, packed my own bags for school trips, and figured out how to deal with teenage problems on my own. Mom never worked. She was too busy being Sarah's personal nurse and advocate. By my senior year of high school, I had perfect grades and a clear plan. I applied for scholarships behind my parents' backs. They were too busy taking Sarah to yet another specialist to help with college applications anyway. The day I got my full scholarship letter, I ran home excited to share the news. I found Mom in the kitchen, preparing Sarah's special allergen-free dinner. Mom, I got a full scholarship to State University. You and Dad won't have to pay anything. That's nice, dear. Could you set the table? Sarah needs to eat on schedule with her new medications. That moment crystallized everything for me. I realized I would never be the priority in this house, no matter what I achieved. But instead of letting it crush me, I let it fuel me. I didn't need their attention or approval. I had something better, I had my freedom. The day I left for college, Mom was too busy with Sarah's latest health crisis to even say goodbye properly. Dad just handed me some gas money and said, "Drive safe." College flew by like a dream. I threw myself into my studies, made real friends for the first time, and graduated with honors. The marketing department at Reynolds and Company snapped me up right after graduation, and suddenly I was earning more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I hadn't heard much from my parents during college, just the occasional text from Mom asking if I was doing okay before immediately launching into updates about Sarah's latest health issues. But that changed once I started working. The first call came about 6 months into my job. "Erica, honey," Mom's voice was sugary sweet, a tone I hadn't heard directed at me before. "Your father and I are in a bit of a tight spot. Sarah needs some new treatments, and with the medical bills." I cut her off. "How much do you need, Mom?" "Oh, just $2,000. We'll pay you back next month." They never did pay me back. Not for that loan, or the next one, or the one after that. But honestly, I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had something they needed, and that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Then I met Mike. He always making me laugh, always seeing the bright side. We dated for a year before he proposed, right there in that same break room with a ring hidden in a coffee cup. When we told my parents we were getting married, Mom's first response was, "Oh, but Sarah's having some health issues right now. We might not be able to contribute much." "We don't need anything," I told her firmly. "We're handling it ourselves." And we did. We had a small, perfect wedding with just our closest friends. Mike and I paid for everything ourselves, took a modest honeymoon to the beach, and came back ready to build our life together. We both worked hard and saved every penny we could. Within 2 years, we had enough for a down payment on a small apartment. 3 years later, it was paid off completely. "We should have a baby," Mike said one night, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset. I looked at him, this wonderful man who had given me everything I'd never had growing up, unconditional love, support, and a true partnership. "Yes," I said. "We should." Emily was born on a spring morning, perfect and healthy. Mike was the proudest dad I'd ever seen, taking pictures of every little thing she did. When she was 2 months old, he got a big promotion at work. "Just one business trip," he told me, kissing Emily's forehead. 3 days in Chicago, then I'm all yours again." I drove him to the train station that morning. That was the last time I saw him. The call I got wasn't from Mike, it was from the railway company. There had been an accident. The train had derailed. There were no survivors. The first few weeks after Mike's death passed in a blur. I moved through my days like a ghost, going through the motions of feeding Emily, changing her, trying to keep both of us alive while feeling half dead inside. The insurance company called with details about Mike's life insurance policy, but money wasn't what I needed most right then. I needed help. "Mom," I said over the phone, my voice cracking. "I can't do this alone. Could you help me with Emily? Just for a few months while I get back on my feet. I'll pay you, whatever you want." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, honey," Mom said, and for a moment I felt hope. Then, I'm not as young as I used to be. Taking care of a baby is so demanding, and with my blood pressure. I just can't risk my health, Erica. Maybe you could hire someone? You have the insurance money now, right?" The words hit me like a slap. I thought about all those years Mom had devoted to Sarah's care, how she'd never worked, because Sarah needed her constant attention. But now, when her other daughter needed her, when her granddaughter needed her. "Yeah," I said flatly. "I'll figure something out." And I did. I found a wonderful nanny named Maria who loved Emily like her own. The insurance money meant I could afford the best care for my daughter, and slowly, we settled into a new normal. Emily grew from a baby into a toddler, showing more of Mike's smile every day. Then came the call about Sarah's engagement. "Your sister is marrying James Peterson," Mom gushed over the phone. "His family owns that big real estate development company. Can you believe it?" "That's great," I said, watching Emily stack blocks on our living room floor. "I'm happy for her." But the next call wasn't so joyful. Dad sounded stressed. "Erica, we need to talk about Sarah's wedding. We're taking out a loan. Using the house as collateral." When he told me the amount, I felt sick. "Dad, no, that's your house. Your retirement security. You can't risk that for one day." "Now listen here," he said, his voice getting that stern tone I remembered from childhood. "We won't have the Petersons thinking we can't give Sarah a proper wedding. We've already signed the papers." I tried reasoning with them. I offered to help pay for a more modest celebration. But Mom just got offended. "You don't understand, Erica. This is Sarah's big day. She deserves her dream wedding. We can't have her future in-laws thinking we're common." I thought about my own wedding, small, modest, perfect. Mike and I had paid for everything ourselves, proud to start our life together without debt. But of course, Sarah needed something grander. Sarah always needed more. Sarah's wedding was exactly what you'd expect, extravagant, over the top, and, according to Mom, absolutely perfect. Then Sarah moved away with James to Boston, and suddenly my parents' perfect daughter wasn't so perfect anymore. "Can you believe she won't even take our calls?" Mom sobbed into the phone one evening. "We took out that loan for her wedding, and now she won't even help with the payments." I bit back an "I told you so" and instead said, "That must be hard, Mom." Gradually, my parents started calling more often, not just when they needed money. They wanted to see Emily, invited us for Sunday dinners, remembered my birthday for the first time in years. It felt nice. Like maybe we could be a real family. I started helping them out, paying bills here and there, buying groceries. For Dad and Mom's 35th wedding anniversary, I surprised them with a 2-week vacation to Florida and a new car for Dad. "You're such a good daughter, Erica," Mom said, actually hugging me. It was the first time I could remember her doing that in years. Then Dad got sick. Really sick. Something with his heart that kept him out of work for months. One evening, they asked me to come over after Emily's bedtime. "We're going to lose the house," Dad said, his voice weak. "The loan payments, without my salary." Mom was crying. "We don't know what to do, Erica. We're behind on payments already. Move in with us," Mom suggested suddenly. "We could help with Emily after school, and you could help with the loan payments. Please, sweetheart. We don't want to lose our home." I thought about my apartment, my independence, the life I'd built for myself and Emily. "I don't know, Mom. It's an hour commute to work from here." "Please," Dad said, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "We'll make it work." Emily would love having her grandparents around. They were right about that part. When I told Emily we might move in with Grandma and Grandpa, her whole face lit up. Within a month, we were moved in. I found good tenants for my apartment, a young couple with steady jobs who signed a year-long lease. Emily was overjoyed, running around the house exploring every corner like it was a magical castle. I took over the loan payments and most of the household expenses. Mom seemed to transform overnight into the grandmother she'd never been before, picking Emily up from school, helping her with homework, making her favorite snacks. "Look what Grandma made for you, Emily," she'd say, pulling fresh cookies from the oven. Emily would beam, and I'd try not to remember all the times I'd come home to an empty kitchen as a child. For a while, it seemed to work. Dad's health improved, though slowly. I adjusted to the long commute, telling myself it was worth it to see Emily so happy. Every month when I made the loan payment, I reminded myself that I was helping my parents keep their home. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a voice that whispered, "How long can this last? When will the other shoe drop?" After Dad recovered and returned to work, I noticed Mom started making excuses about watching Emily. "My back hurts today, Erica. I'm not as young as I used to be. It's so exhausting keeping up with a child her age." Finally, one morning, she just came out with it, "I think you should hire a nanny. I can't handle this anymore." So I hired Karen, a sweet older lady who clicked with Emily immediately. Every morning, I'd leave for my hour-long commute to work, wondering why I was still living in my parents' house when I had a perfectly good apartment across town. But every time I mentioned moving back, Mom would bake her famous apple pie, the one she knew Emily loved, and say things like, "Oh, but we love having you both here. Don't we live so well together?" Emily would beam, her face covered in apple filling, and I'd push down my frustration for another month. This went on for 2 years. Then one evening, Mom and Dad sat me down after Emily went to bed. "Honey," Mom started, her eyes already welling up. "We still have 2 years left on Sarah's wedding loan." Dad jumped in, "We know it's a lot to ask, but could you stay until it's paid off? We're so close to being free of it." I thought about the exhausting commute, the way my life had been put on hold. But then I thought about Emily's happy face when she talked about living with her grandparents. "Okay," I said. "1 more year." I called my tenants and extended their lease. Then came the day that changed everything. I walked up to the house after another long day at work, and there was Sarah, standing in the doorway with a very pregnant belly. "Move away from the door, Sarah," Mom screeched from inside. "You'll catch your death in that draft." Sarah smirked at me as she stepped aside. Well, look who's here." Inside, it was like stepping back in time. Mom was fluttering around Sarah like a worried hen, adjusting pillows, checking her temperature, asking if she needed anything. "I made your favorite dinner, Sarah. And there's herbal tea for the baby." During dinner, Sarah dropped her bombshell. "I've decided to have the baby here," she announced. "So you and Dad can help with the newborn." Mom's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Of course we will. We'll help with everything." I sat there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, as the memory hit me like a physical blow. Me, alone with 3-month-old Emily, desperately calling Mom after Mike's death. "You know I can't risk my health taking care of a baby, Erica." I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw with perfect clarity what I'd been trying to ignore for years. Nothing had changed. Nothing would ever change. Sarah would always be the one who needed them, and I would always be the one who needed to understand. For the next 2 weeks, I watched history repeat itself in excruciating detail. Mom waited on Sarah hand and foot, bringing her breakfast in bed, scheduling doctor's appointments, and stocking the house with her favorite foods. The monthly apple pie that had been Mom's way of keeping Emily and me there? It stopped appearing altogether. The final straw came one evening when I overheard Mom and Sarah discussing nursery plans for my room and Emily's room. I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the living room where everyone was gathered. "So that's it? You're just going to pretend the last few years never happened? That Sarah didn't abandon you with a massive loan that I've been helping pay?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Saint Erica to the rescue." "Sarah, honey, don't get upset. It's not good for the baby," Mom fussed. "No, let's talk about this," I pressed on. "Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for her wedding, and then she disappeared. Let's talk about how I've been paying that loan while she was off living her best life." "That's none of your business," Sarah snapped. "Nobody asked you to pay anything. If you're so unhappy here, why don't you just go back to your precious apartment?" "Erica," Mom cut in, practically pushing me toward the door. "Why don't you run to the store? We need a few things." She thrust a shopping list into my hands. "It'll give everyone a chance to calm down." I felt like a child being sent to my room, but I went. Maybe the fresh air would help me think clearly. 20 minutes later, I returned with the groceries. The sight that greeted me stopped me cold. Emily was sitting on the front steps, crying, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, all our belongings. "Mommy!" She ran to me, sobbing. Aunt Sarah yelled at me. She said we had to get out, and when I started crying, she scared me and pushed all our stuff out here. Something snapped inside me. I stormed into the house. "How dare you?" I shouted. "How dare you treat my daughter like this?" "Erica, calm down," Dad started. "No, I will not calm down. For years, I've watched you favor Sarah. When Mike died, and I needed help with Emily, you couldn't be bothered. But Sarah snaps her fingers and you jump. I paid your bills, your loan, helped save your house, and this is how you repay me? By throwing my child out?" "Now listen here," Mom began. "No, you listen. I've spent my entire life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who's supposed to understand when Sarah needs something. I've given you everything, and you've given me nothing but scraps of attention when Sarah wasn't around to demand it all." I grabbed the grocery bags and hurled them across the room. Cans rolled across the floor, eggs cracked, and vegetables scattered everywhere. Mom gasped. Sarah smirked. Dad's face turned red with anger. "Get out," he roared. "Get out of our house, and don't you dare come back." "You're no daughter of ours," Mom added, her voice cold. "We never want to see you again." I stood there, breathing hard, looking at these people who were supposed to be my family. Then I turned and walked out, closing the door on 28 years of trying to be good enough. Standing on the sidewalk that night, surrounded by hastily packed bags and boxes, I felt completely lost. Emily's small hand gripped mine tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, trying to think clearly. Our apartment was rented out for another year, and I couldn't just kick the tenants out. Legally, I needed to give them 3 months' notice. I called a nearby hotel first, then ordered an Uber XL to help with our bags. As Emily fell asleep in the hotel bed that night, I sat in the darkness with my laptop, searching for temporary apartments. The next morning, I found a furnished month-to-month rental about 15 minutes from my office. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. I called my tenants while Emily was eating breakfast. "Hi, Lisa," I said to my tenant. "I hate to do this, but I need to give you notice. Some family circumstances have changed." Lisa was understanding. "Of course. We'll start looking right away. Take care, Erica." The next 3 months were strange. Our temporary apartment felt like living in limbo, not quite homeless, but not quite home either. Emily was quieter than usual, processing everything in her own way. Finally, after what felt like forever, Lisa called to say they'd found a new place. 3 months to the day after being thrown out of my parents' house, Emily and I walked back into our apartment. The moment I turned the key in the lock, something shifted inside me. This was our home. Our safe place. No drama, no favoritism, no walking on eggshells. "We're home." Emily ran from room to room, rediscovering her old toys and books we'd left behind. That night, after Emily was asleep, I sat down and really looked at our finances. We were doing well, better than well, actually. Without supporting my parents, I had extra money each month. I opened a new savings account specifically for Emily's college fund and set up automatic monthly transfers. Over the next few weeks, we settled back into our old routine. Emily went back to her old school, where her friends welcomed her back with open arms. I threw myself into work, earning a promotion I'd been too distracted to pursue while living with my parents. 6 peaceful months passed. Emily and I had found our rhythm again: school, work, movie nights, weekend adventures. No drama, no guilt, no complicated family dynamics. Just us. Then came the knock at our door one Sunday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole. My heart stopped. There stood my parents, and they were holding a baby. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "Erica, please," Mom started crying immediately. "We need your help." Dad looked older than I remembered, more broken. Sarah, she's gone. They told me the whole story as they stood in my doorway. I hadn't invited them in. Sarah's husband had discovered she was cheating. A DNA test proved the baby wasn't his. He divorced her and refused any responsibility for the child. And Sarah? She dropped the baby with our parents and disappeared. We don't know where she is, Mom sobbed. She won't answer our calls. We can't do this alone, Erica. We need you to move back in. Help with the loan payments, help with the baby. I'm too old to care for an infant, Mom added, making that familiar tired face I'd seen so many times before. Please, sweetheart. We'll lose the house. I looked at them, really looked at them. Mom's manipulative tears. Dad's desperate eyes. The innocent baby in their arms. And suddenly, I saw everything with perfect clarity. No, I said quietly. What? Mom's tears stopped abruptly. I said no, I won't help you. Not this time. How can you be so heartless? Mom's voice rose, echoing through the hallway. Your own family. We'll be out on the street. They'll take our house. All because you're too selfish to help. Several neighbors' doors opened, curious faces peeking out. You want to do this here, Mom? Fine. My voice was steady. Let's talk about how you refused to help me when Mike died and I had a 3-month-old. Let's talk about how you mortgaged your house for Sarah's wedding. Let's talk about how Sarah abandoned you with that loan, just like she's abandoned her baby now. This isn't about me being heartless, this is about you finally facing the consequences of your choices. How dare you, Dad started. No, how dare you? You created this situation with your constant favoritism. You taught Sarah she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. And now you want me to clean up your mess again? Not happening. We're your parents, Mom wailed. No, I said firmly. You're Sarah's parents. You made that very clear the night you threw my daughter out on the street. Now please leave, and don't come back. Forget my address, forget my phone number, forget I exist, just like you did for most of my life. I closed the door on their protests and leaned against it, breathing hard. Through the door, I could hear Mom's continued screaming, but it didn't touch me anymore. Mommy? Emily stood in the hallway, watching me. Are you okay? I walked over and hugged her tight. Yes, baby. I'm better than okay. I'm free. That was the last time I saw my parents. I don't know what happened to them or Sarah or the baby. Sometimes Emily asks about them, and I'm honest with her. I tell her that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, even if they're family. These days, our life is good. Emily is thriving in school, I love my job, and we're building the kind of life I always dreamed of, one based on real love, not obligation or manipulation. Sometimes, late at night, I look at old family photos and feel a twinge of sadness for what could have been. But then I look at Emily, growing up strong and secure in the knowledge that she is loved unconditionally, and I know I made the right choice. I don't remember my mother's face. She died when I was 2, leaving just scattered photographs and Dad's stories to piece together who she was. My name is Kimberly, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the truth is the only weapon you need against lies. Growing up in a politician's house meant getting used to empty spaces. Our mansion had 6 bedrooms, but most days it felt like I rattled around in there alone, like a marble in an empty box. Dad threw himself into his work after Mom died. For 2 years straight, he was just gone. Not physically, he still lived with us, but emotionally, he might as well have been on another planet. Your father's giving a speech tonight, Kimberly, my nanny, Sarah, would say, turning on the TV. See, there he is. I'd press my little hands against the screen, trying to touch his face. That's how I usually saw him back then, through a glass barrier, talking to crowds of strangers instead of me. Thank God for Grandma Rose. She'd come over almost every day, bringing her famous chocolate chip cookies and stories about Dad when he was my age. I was 6 when everything changed. Dad came home one evening, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. "Kimberly, honey, I want you to meet someone special," he said. That's how Patricia entered our lives. My new stepmother was tall, perfectly put together, with this practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. I remember standing there in my Pokemon pajamas, looking up at her, and feeling something off. The first few months weren't too bad. Patricia mostly ignored me, which was fine by me. I had my own wing of the house anyway, my bedroom, bathroom, and a little study area where I did my homework. Sarah stayed on as my nanny, and between her and Grandma Rose, I barely had to interact with Patricia at all. But I started noticing things. Like how Patricia's smile would drop the second Dad left the room. Or how she'd accidentally schedule her fancy lunch parties during my piano recitals, so Dad had to choose between them. He always chose her events, couldn't disappoint the wife of a rising political star, after all. "Don't take it personally, sweetie," Grandma Rose would tell me. "Your father's just busy. The campaign trail is demanding." I tried not to. Really, I did. But it's hard not to take it personally when you're watching your father's career updates on YouTube instead of having dinner with him. When your stepmother's shopping sprees get more attention than your straight A's. High school changed everything. Dad started talking about my future more, probably because his advisors told him education was a hot topic for voters. Whatever the reason, I wasn't complaining. For the first time in years, he seemed actually interested in my life. "Yale, Harvard, Stanford, take your pick, Kimmy," he said one evening, surprising me by actually being home for dinner. "With your grades, you could get into any of them. I'll cover everything, tuition, housing, whatever you need." I nearly choked on my pasta. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Then came my 16th birthday. I walked outside that morning to find a brand new Mercedes in the driveway, complete with a massive red bow. Dad was standing there, grinning like a kid himself. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." He dangled the keys in front of me. "Think you can handle it?" I screamed and hugged him so hard I probably wrinkled his $1,000 suit. For a moment, I felt like I had my old dad back, the one from before Mom died, before politics ate his life. Patricia's voice cut through my joy like ice. "A Mercedes? Really, Richard? For a 16-year-old? I could practically feel her glaring at my back as Dad showed me the car's features. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. "You're turning her into exactly what the opposition accuses us of representing, privileged, entitled rich kids." Patricia's voice carried through the walls. "What's next? A private jet for graduation? She's my daughter, Patricia. I've missed too many birthdays already. And how will it look when she wraps that car around a tree? Or when her spoiled little friends get her into drugs? Have you thought about your campaign?" After that, Patricia made it her mission to save me from myself, as she put it. Every time Dad mentioned college plans, she'd bring up some article about trust fund kids going wild at university. When I needed money for school supplies, she'd question every penny. "Kimberly, dear," she'd say in that sugary voice she used when her country club friends were over, "do tell everyone about that C you got in chemistry. Such a shame, especially with all the resources your father provides." Meanwhile, her own credit card bills were astronomical. "I'm so lonely when Richard's away," she'd pout to Dad. "Shopping is my only comfort. Another $5,000 handbag. Another spa weekend. Another renovation project." I tried staying out of it. Really, I did. But Patricia wouldn't let me. "Your father works so hard," she'd say loudly when her friends visited, "and some people just take without any gratitude." She'd look right at me while saying it. One day, I finally snapped. It was during one of her lunch parties. She'd been making little digs at me all afternoon, and I just couldn't take it anymore. "At least I'm not the one bleeding him dry with shopping sprees," I shot back. The room went silent. Patricia's face turned red. That evening, Dad called me into his study. "Patricia tells me you embarrassed her in front of her friends today. Kimberly, you need to try harder. She's doing her best to be a mother to you." I wanted to scream. Instead, I just nodded and went to my room. After that, I became a ghost in my own house. I took my meals in my room, timing my kitchen raids for when Patricia was out. I studied harder than ever, determined to get into a college far away from her. The only time I had to see her was when Dad was home, and then I'd play my part in our little family theater production. Winter break couldn't come fast enough that year. My friends had planned a snowboarding trip to Mountain Ridge Resort, and surprisingly, Patricia agreed when I asked permission. Dad was away on some campaign tour, as usual. "Here's money for the trip," Patricia said, holding out several $100 bills. Her lips were pressed into a thin line. "But remember, Kimberly, no showing off. We don't need stories about the politician's spoiled daughter making a scene at a ski resort." The morning we left, the sky was perfect, crystal clear blue, with fresh powder on the slopes. I'd been snowboarding at Mountain Ridge since I was 13, and the familiar rush of excitement filled me as we pulled into the parking lot. The first few runs were perfect. The wind in my face, the spray of snow, the absolute freedom, this was my happy place. No Patricia, no political drama, just me and the mountain. Then it happened. I still replay that moment in my head sometimes. I was on my favorite trail, coming down at a good clip. I'd done this run dozens of times before. But somehow, maybe I caught an edge, maybe I was going too fast, everything went wrong in an instant. The world spun. Sky, snow, sky, snow. I felt myself rolling, tumbling, my body hitting the slope again and again. There was pain, sharp and overwhelming, and then everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing and people shouting in the distance. "Don't move." Someone was kneeling beside me. "The ski patrol is coming." The pain in my legs was excruciating. Through the haze, I heard words like multiple fractures and emergency transport. In the ambulance, once they'd given me something for the pain, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. Dad would know what to do. Dad would help. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. With growing desperation, I called Patricia. "What?" her sharp voice answered. "Patricia, there's been an accident." "I'm in an ambulance." "Of course there has." Her voice turned venomous. "You worthless little drunk. I knew you'd pull something like this. Stealing money wasn't enough, now you have to embarrass your father with a drunken accident?" "What? I wasn't drinking. I just fell." "Save your lies for someone else, you little thief. Don't bother calling again." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in shock, tears streaming down my face. Thief? Drunk? What was she talking about? "Miss, we're almost at the hospital," the paramedic said gently. "Is there someone else we can call for you?" I nodded numbly, giving them Grandma Rose's number. My legs throbbed with every bump in the road, but somehow the pain in my chest hurt worse. Hours passed in a blur of x-rays, doctors, and morphine. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Dad to call back. He had to have gotten my messages by now. He had to know I was hurt. But no call came. The nurses were kind, bringing me extra blankets and Jell-O cups. But as night fell and I lay there alone in the sterile hospital room, listening to the beeping of machines, I felt more abandoned than I ever had in my life. I woke up to sunshine streaming through the hospital window and the familiar scent of Grandma Rose's perfume. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt okay. Then I saw her face. Grandma Rose looked older than I'd ever seen her, her usual warm smile replaced by something pained and worried. She was wringing her hands, something she only did when things were really bad. "Grandma, what's wrong? Is Dad coming?" She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "Oh, Kimberly, your father called me last night. He's very angry, sweetheart. He says you put his whole campaign at risk." "What? How?" "He says She paused, looking like each word hurt her. He says you stole money from the house. That you were drinking with your friends on the mountain, got into some kind of fight, and then fell while intoxicated. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's not true. None of that is true. I was just snowboarding, you know I've done it 100 times before. I know, honey, I know, she reached for my hand. But your father, he wants you to come stay with me after you're released. He says he's too disappointed to see you right now. The room started spinning. This couldn't be happening. My own father thought I was a drunk thief? He wouldn't even come see me in the hospital? But Grandma, you know me. You know I wouldn't. Of course I know, sweetheart. She squeezed my hand. We'll figure this out. We always do. I spent the next few hours trying to process everything. My legs ached, but the pain in my heart was worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dad's face from my 16th birthday, proud and smiling. How had everything gone so wrong? Then the door opened, and Patricia walked in. A nurse was checking my drip, and Patricia put on quite a show. Oh, you poor dear, she cooed, patting my hand. This must be so difficult for you. The nurse smiled approvingly at my stepmother's apparent concern. She's lucky to have such a caring family, she said, making some notes on my chart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell the nurse that this woman was the reason my own father wouldn't come see me. But I just lay there, watching Patricia play her part. As soon as the nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, something in my gut told me to reach for my phone. I'd learned long ago to trust those instincts when it came to Patricia. Quietly, I started the voice recorder. Just in time. Patricia's face transformed into something ugly and triumphant. She perched on the edge of my bed, enjoying my discomfort as I tried to shift away. Oh, Kimberly, she practically purred. You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment. What are you talking about? She laughed, not her usual polite titter, but a harsh, cruel sound. You really are slow, aren't you? Let me spell it out for you. Daddy dearest thinks his precious little girl is a drunk and a thief. My throat went dry. You told him that? Of course I did. And the best part? She leaned in closer, her expensive perfume making me nauseous. He believed every word. That you stole thousands from his safe, money that's actually sitting quite nicely in my private account, by the way. That you were drinking and fighting on that mountain before your little accident. He'll never believe. He already has. She was practically gloating now. Your father won't be paying for any fancy colleges now. No more trust fund, no more inheritance. I've made sure of that. Soon, I'll be his sole heir, exactly as it should be. I felt the walls closing in. Why? Why are you doing this? Because you're in my way. Always have been. His precious little reminder of his first wife. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt. But now you're just the family disappointment. The drunk, crippled daughter he'd rather forget. Tears were streaming down my face now. I'll get better, the doctors said. Please, she waved her hand dismissively. You'll be lucky if you ever walk normally again. Not that it matters, you won't need that fancy car of yours anymore. I'll be taking that off your hands. After all, what use does a disabled person have for a Mercedes? She walked to the door, then turned back with a smile that chilled me to my bones. Face it, Kimberly. You're all alone now. No money, no father, no future. Just you and your dear old grandmother, struggling to get by. Exactly where you belong. The door clicked shut behind her, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. I played back the recording, her venomous words, now preserved forever in digital form. My fingers hovered over the phone screen as I contemplated what to do with this evidence. After I was discharged from the hospital, I did not return to my parents' place. Grandma Rose's house wasn't huge like my father's mansion, but it had something our old house never had, warmth. Real warmth, the kind that comes from love, not central heating. Recovery was hell. Physical therapy 3 times a week, endless exercises, learning to walk again step by excruciating step. Grandma Rose was there through all of it, holding my hand when the pain got too bad, celebrating every tiny victory. Between therapy sessions, I threw myself into my studies. My laptop became my classroom, video lectures, online assignments, virtual study groups. Some days I could barely get out of bed, but I still logged on, determined not to let Patricia's predictions about my future come true. Then came graduation time. I'd managed to keep my grades up despite everything, and the acceptance letters started arriving. Yale, Columbia, Berkeley. Each one a dream school, each one completely out of reach. With shaking hands, I dialed Dad's number. It had been a year since the accident, since he'd abandoned me. Maybe now. Dad? My voice sounded small, even to myself. Kimberly. Cold. Formal. A politician's voice. I told you not to call. Please, just listen. I got into Yale. I'm not paying for college for a thief and a drunk. Don't call this number again. Click. I sat there, phone in hand, the recording from the hospital burning a hole in my pocket. I could have played it for him. Could have exposed Patricia's lies right then and there. But something stopped me. Pride, maybe. Or maybe it was the realization that a father who could believe those lies so easily, who could abandon his injured daughter without even hearing her side, maybe he didn't deserve the truth. I'll find another way, I told Grandma that night. And I did. I got a job as a barista, then picked up evening shifts at a bookstore. I learned to tune out the news when Dad's face appeared on TV, campaigning for his next big position. I stopped flinching when customers mentioned his name, stopped caring when they talked about what a family man he was. 3 years passed like that. Wake up, go to work, study in between shifts, save every penny. Grandma Rose helped as much as she could, even trying to sell her antique jewelry at one point. I wouldn't let her. You should be proud of yourself, she told me one evening as I counted my savings. I was about halfway to my goal. I realized. And I was. The girl who'd lived in that mansion, who'd driven that Mercedes, who'd waited desperately for her father's attention, she was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who didn't need his approval or his money. I was wiping down tables at the coffee shop when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Usually, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Hello? Kimberly, darling, that honey sweet voice. Patricia. My hand tightened around the phone. What do you want? Now, is that any way to talk to your loving stepmother? She laughed that fake laugh I remembered so well. Especially when I'm calling with such an opportunity for you. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. I'm not interested in anything you have to offer. Oh, but you will be. Your father's campaign is ramping up again. His image team has this brilliant idea, focusing on family values. They want to do a series of interviews with you. I almost laughed. You can't be serious. Very serious. You'll talk about what a wonderful father Richard is, how supportive he's been. How close we all are as a family. The loving daughter, reunited with her devoted father and stepmother. The public will eat it up. The sheer audacity of it struck me speechless for a moment. 3 years of silence, of struggling, of rebuilding my life from scratch, and now they wanted me to play happy families? You're insane, I finally managed. Why would I ever help you? Her voice turned sharp. Because if you don't, you can forget about any inheritance. And don't forget, your father can still press charges for that money you stole. I never stole anything. You took that money. Your word against mine, dear. Who do you think people will believe? The respected politician's wife or the troubled, alcoholic daughter? Something snapped inside me. All these years of swallowing her lies, of taking the high road, for what? Go to hell, Patricia. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I sat at my tiny desk in Grandma's house. My laptop hummed to life. The audio files were right where I'd kept them all this time, Patricia's hospital room confession, and now this latest call too. 3 years ago, I'd chosen silence. Chose to walk away and rebuild on my own terms. But enough was enough. I opened my social media accounts. Started typing. For 3 years, I've stayed quiet about what really happened. I attached the audio files. Added screenshots of Patricia's threatening messages. Everything. My finger hovered over the post button. This would change everything, not just for Patricia and Dad, but for me too. No going back after this. I pressed post. I had no idea what I'd started. Within hours, my post went viral. By morning, it was everywhere: news sites, political blogs, social media. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from reporters and TV producers. "We'd love to have you tell your story on our morning show," they'd say. Or, "This could really damage your father's campaign. Care to comment?" I turned them all down. This wasn't about revenge anymore. Watching his polling numbers plummet didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. If anything, it made me feel hollow. Then, exactly 1 week after the post, my phone rang. Dad's number. "Can we meet?" he asked. His voice sounded different, tired, human. "Please?" We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop, not the one where I worked, but a quiet place across town. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished politician in his perfect suit. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he hadn't slept in days, his tie loose, his shoulders slumped. "Kimberly," he said, standing up. "I don't even know where to start." "The beginning might be good," I said, sitting down. He took a deep breath. I heard the recordings. All of them. I'd been listening to them over and over, trying to understand how I could have been so blind. His voice cracked. "I failed you. Not just after the accident, but for years before that. I was so focused on my career, on building this perfect political image, that I forgot what really mattered." Tears were streaming down his face now. I'd never seen my father cry before. "Patricia confessed everything," he continued. "The stolen money, the lies about you drinking, how she manipulated the whole situation after your accident. She admitted she'd been trying to drive us apart for years." He reached across the table, taking my hands in his. "Can you ever forgive me?" I started crying too. "I missed you, Dad, so much." We stood up and hugged, right there in the middle of the coffee shop. 3 years of pain and separation dissolved in that embrace. "I filed for divorce," he told me later. "The lawyers are handling it. And I want to pay for your college, any school you want. It's the least I can do." "Yale's still my dream school," I admitted. "Then Yale it is." That evening, I made another post. This time, I told the whole story, not just Patricia's manipulation, but also how my father had owned his mistakes and chosen to make things right. To my surprise, people loved it. The story of a politician choosing his daughter over his image, admitting his failures, and working to make amends resonated with voters in a way no carefully crafted campaign message ever could. 2 months later, I moved into my dorm at Yale. Dad helped me carry my boxes up, just like any other father would. Grandma Rose cried happy tears as she made my bed with fresh sheets. Patricia? Last I heard, she was living off her divorce settlement somewhere in Florida. Sometimes I think about sending her a thank you note. After all, her final power play was what ultimately brought my father and me back together. But mostly, I think about how healing isn't always quiet or private. Sometimes it takes a public explosion to clear the way for something better to grow. Sometimes you have to break everything down to build it back up right. As for me, I'm majoring in political science. Ironic, I know. But I figure someone needs to show the world that politics and truth aren't always enemies. And Dad? He won his next election. Turns out, people prefer real humanity over perfect facades anyway. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that sometimes, the truth does more than that. Sometimes, it brings you home. My name is Sandra, and I'm the second child in a family of retail workers. My parents were always busy, rushing between work and various development courses they attended with my older brother. As for me? Well, I was the afterthought. From my earliest memories, it was clear who the star of our family show was. My brother got everything first, the newest toys, the latest gadgets, all the attention. Me? I got his hand-me-downs. And yes, that included his clothes, which was particularly tough since, you know, I was a girl who desperately wanted to wear something feminine for once. The only real bright spot in my childhood was my grandmother, Mom's mother. She was my saving grace, picking me up from school every day and taking me to her house. Unlike my parents, who were always too busy with my brother's activities, Grandma actually cared about my life. "How was school today, sweetheart?" she'd ask, her eyes twinkling with genuine interest as we walked home. "Did you learn anything exciting?" She was the one who showed up at parent-teacher meetings, who checked my homework, who actually knew what was happening in my life. While my parents were busy playing Monopoly with my brother, their favorite family activity that somehow never included me, I'd be sent off to watch cartoons alone. "Sandra, honey, why don't you go watch TV?" Mom would say whenever I tried to join their game. "The rules are too complicated for you." That was pretty much how things went in our house. I learned early on to be self-sufficient, cooking my own lunch, cleaning my room, doing my homework without help. It wasn't that my parents were bad people, they just had their golden child, and it wasn't me. But looking back now, I can see how those early experiences shaped me. While they were grooming my brother to be their future business prodigy, I was developing independence and self-reliance. I learned to take care of myself, to find my own path, and most importantly, to recognize the value of having someone like my grandmother in my corner. Everything changed the day I bought that superhero comic book. I'd saved up my pocket money for weeks, counting every penny until I finally had enough. Standing in front of the magazine rack, I felt like I was about to discover a whole new world, and I was right. "Are you sure you want to spend your money on that?" the store clerk asked, probably used to kids buying candy instead. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, clutching my precious purchase. That night, I couldn't sleep. The artwork in the comic book was mesmerizing. I found myself tracing the lines with my fingers, studying how the artists created movement and emotion with just ink and paper. The next morning, I grabbed some notebook paper and started drawing. At first, my sketches were rough, stick figures with wobbly lines. But I practiced every chance I got. During lunch breaks, after homework, even during some classes, sorry, math teacher. Soon, my drawing started improving, and that's when an idea hit me. "Hey, what if we created our own superhero?" I suggested to my friends during lunch one day. "Someone different from the usual ones." "Like what?" my friend Lisa asked, genuinely interested. "What about a hero who helps homeless animals and kids in need?" I suggested, already sketching in my notebook. "No fancy superpowers, just someone who actually cares." My friends loved it. We started working on it together, coming up with stories during lunch breaks. I'd draw rough sketches, and we'd all contribute ideas. Our hero became real to us, a regular person who chose to make a difference. Ms. Thompson, our homeroom teacher, caught us passing around our latest comic story during class one day. Instead of getting angry, she asked to see it. I nervously handed over our work, expecting detention. "Sandra, this is remarkable," she said, flipping through the pages. "Would you consider doing something like this for the school newspaper?" Before I knew it, our little comic was appearing in the school paper. Other students started coming up to me in the hallways, asking about the next installment. For the first time in my life, I was known for something I'd created, not as someone's sister. My brother noticed the attention I was getting. "It's just some dumb drawings," he'd mutter at home, clearly annoyed that people were talking about me instead of him. Then came career day. Ms. Thompson asked everyone what they wanted to be when they grew up. Without thinking, I stood up and said, "A designer." The whole class erupted in support. "That makes so much sense. Your art is amazing. You'd be perfect for that." Ms. Thompson smiled warmly. "With your talent and dedication, I think that's a wonderful choice, Sandra." I was so excited that I couldn't wait to tell my parents. That evening at dinner, I shared my dream. "A designer?" Mom laughed, exchanging looks with Dad. "Honey, that's not a real career path. If you want to be successful," Dad added, "you need to think like an entrepreneur. Look at your brother, he already understands business principles." "But I don't want to do business," I protested. "I want to create things." "Creating things won't pay the bills," Mom dismissed my dream with a wave of her hand. "You need to be practical." Hurt and disappointed, I went to the one person I knew would understand, Grandma. When I showed her my drawings and told her about my dreams, her eyes lit up. "My talented girl," she said, hugging me tight. "Wait right here." The next day, she surprised me with an easel, real canvases, and a set of professional paints. But that wasn't all. She cleared out her spare room, transforming it into a proper art studio just for me. Time moved on, and my brother graduated from high school with all the fanfare you'd expect. The graduation party my parents threw for him was extravagant. They invited the whole family and all his friends. I still remember the day he announced his college plans at dinner, right after the festivities had died down. "I got accepted into the economics program," he declared proudly, waving his acceptance letter. "I'm going to be the richest businessman this family has ever seen. Just watch me." "That's our boy," Dad beamed, raising his glass. "Now that's what I call planning for the future. You'll make us all proud." Mom wiped away happy tears. "We always knew you were destined for great things." Meanwhile, I was in my final years of high school, splitting my time between regular classes and developing my art portfolio. My little studio at Grandma's had become my sanctuary, walls covered with sketches and paintings. Every new piece felt like another step toward my dream of becoming a designer. I'd spend hours there after school, perfecting my techniques and working on new projects. When graduation finally came around, I'd already been accepted into the design program at the local college. My portfolio had impressed the admissions committee, but my parents' reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Well," Mom sighed, looking at my acceptance letter like it was a bill she didn't want to pay, "I suppose we'll pay for it. But don't come crying to us when you can't find a job. Art degrees aren't exactly practical." By the time I started college, my brother had already graduated and opened his own auto parts store. My parents couldn't stop talking about it. Every family dinner, every phone call, every conversation somehow circled back to his entrepreneurial spirit. I was just starting to feel comfortable in my college routine, really diving into my design projects and making friends with like-minded creative people, when everything exploded. My parents showed up unannounced one day after my design theory class, catching me as I was walking across campus with my portfolio case. "Sandra, we need to talk," Mom said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a casual visit. Her face had that determined look I'd learned to dread over the years. "You need to leave college," Dad announced without preamble, standing in the middle of the campus walkway. "Your brother needs help at the store." I thought they were joking at first. "What? You can't be serious." "He's spending too much on employee salaries," Mom explained, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "As his sister, you can work for free. It's the least you can do for family. We've always taught you the importance of family." They laid out their plan in excruciating detail. I'd work as a salesperson, handle inventory, make cold calls, and clean the store every evening. All without pay, of course. They'd clearly thought this through, though they hadn't thought about what I wanted at all. "And what exactly will my brother be doing while I'm doing all this work?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. I could feel my hands cramping around my portfolio case, my knuckles turning white from the grip. Mom's expression brightened, as if she was explaining something wonderful to a particularly slow child. He'll be managing the store, of course. He has a business degree, Sandra. He's qualified to run things. Your brother has studied for this. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. I'm not dropping out. I've already done an internship at Davidson Design Studio, and they've hinted at a position after graduation. That's what I want, to work as a designer. They even said they've never had an intern with my level of creativity. Mom's laugh cut through the air like a knife. It was loud enough to make nearby students turn and stare, some of them giving me sympathetic looks. Oh, honey. You want to work for someone else's uncle? Be someone's employee? We're offering you a family business, a real future. Do you know how many people would kill for this opportunity? Mom, please, I pleaded, fighting back tears. My portfolio felt heavy in my hands, filled with projects I'd poured my heart into. I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to run a business. I want to draw. I want to create. I'm good at it. My professors say I have real talent. Professor Jenkins even said I could have a real future in this field. Talent doesn't pay bills, Mom snapped, her face hardening. But since you're being stubborn about this. She straightened her jacket and turned to Dad. We're going to the administration office right now. We'll tell them you're no longer a student here and that we're withdrawing our tuition payment. My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mom, Dad, please don't do this. Please just listen to me for once. This is my future we're talking about. There's nothing to discuss, Mom said coldly. You either come work at the store, or we stop paying for this hobby of yours. It's time you grew up and faced reality. Through my tears, I watched my parents' figures getting smaller as they walked away, heading to dismantle my future. The autumn leaves swirled around them as they disappeared into the building. 45 minutes later, they emerged, looking pleased with themselves. They spotted me still sitting on the bench and walked over, triumphant smiles on their faces. Well, that's taken care of, Mom announced brightly. We've signed the withdrawal papers and canceled the tuition payments. You're officially no longer a student here starting next semester. Time to pack up your things and come home, Dad added, as if he was telling me about a surprise party. Your brother needs you at the store first thing Monday morning. Welcome to the real world, Sandra, Mom said, patting my shoulder. Trust me, you'll look back on this day and realize we did you a favor. Now let's go home, you have a lot of packing to do. They turned and walked away, leaving me sitting there with my now useless portfolio and shattered dreams. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had never let me down. Grandma, I sobbed into the phone. They're making me leave college. They went to the administration and... Slow down, sweetheart, her calm voice came through. Tell me everything. Through tears, I explained the situation, the store, my brother's needs, my parents' ultimatum, everything. Grandma listened quietly, only occasionally making small sounds of disapproval. Don't pack a single thing, she said firmly when I finished. I'm coming down there tomorrow. This nonsense stops now. You just focus on your studies. True to her word, Grandma arrived 3 days later. I didn't go with her to the administration building, I was too nervous, but when she came out 2 hours later, she was smiling. It's all taken care of, she announced. I paid for the rest of your education. You're staying right where you belong. I hugged her so tight I thought I might break something. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The peace lasted exactly 6 hours, and all this time, Grandma spent time with me. That's when Mom called her. How dare you interfere? I could hear Mom's voice screaming through the phone from across the room. This is none of your business. Grandma held the phone away from her ear, rolling her eyes. It became my business when you tried to destroy your daughter's future. The yelling continued for several minutes before Grandma simply hung up. Then my phone started ringing. "If you don't come to your senses right now," Mom's voice was ice cold, "you can consider yourself disinherited." "Is that what you want? To throw away your family for some art classes?" I took a deep breath, my hand steady for the first time in days. "I'm staying in college, Mom. I'm sorry, but I have to follow my own path." "Then you're no daughter of mine." The line went dead. An hour later, I saw the Facebook post, heartbroken. "Our own daughter has abandoned her family in our time of need. She's chosen selfish pursuits over family loyalty. Please pray for us during this difficult time." The comments section exploded. Aunt Sarah wrote, "I always knew she was an ungrateful child." Uncle Jim countered with, "Let the girl follow her dreams." Cousin Rachel chimed in about family obligations, while my high school friend Emma defended my right to choose my own path. I sat on my bed, reading comment after comment, feeling sick to my stomach. Grandma found me there, still scrolling through the reactions. "Stop reading that garbage," she said firmly, taking my phone away. "You know what? I've made a decision. I'm changing my will, everything I have is going to you." I looked up, startled. "Grandma, no, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I've watched your parents and brother long enough. They'd burn through my life savings in a month on another half-baked business scheme. But you," she cupped my face in her hands, "you have real talent and drive. You'll make something of yourself." Life has a funny way of proving people right or wrong. I was deep into my final year of college when Grandma called with the news about my brother's store. "It's closing down," she said, trying to keep the "I told you so" out of her voice. "Your brother couldn't make the numbers work." "What happened?" I asked, though I already had a pretty good idea. "Same old story, more money going out than coming in. But here's the kicker." She paused for dramatic effect. "He's already got another brilliant business idea." Sure enough, a week later, my brother's Facebook status lit up with excitement, proud to announce my newest venture. "Opening Ink Master Studios with my buddy Mike. Best tattoo parlor in town, coming soon. Entrepreneur, business owner, success." I couldn't help but notice he'd used the artist emoji, when he'd always mocked my artistic pursuits. Grandma kept me updated on the family drama. "Your parents took out another loan against what's left of their equity," she told me during one of our weekly dinners. "They're funding this tattoo parlor scheme now. Second mortgage, if you can believe it." The tattoo parlor started off with a big grand opening party. My brother posted daily photos of their luxury space, way too big for a starter business, but he always did think bigger was better. Their social media was full of professional-looking photos of the expensive furniture and top-of-the-line equipment. But then the posts started changing. More and more of them featured free tattoos for influencers and promotional work. Especially, as Grandma noted with a snort, for pretty girls who caught my brother's or Mike's eye. It took exactly 1 year for the tattoo parlor to go under. Too much overhead, too many freebies, not enough paying customers. The going out of business sign went up without any social media fanfare. Meanwhile, my life was taking a very different direction. I graduated with honors, my final portfolio stronger than I could have imagined when I first started college. The day after graduation, I got the call I'd been hoping for. "We'd love to have you join our team," said Sarah, the creative director at Davidson Design Studio. "Your internship work was exceptional, and your current portfolio, well, let's just say we'd be crazy to let you go elsewhere." The salary they offered was more than I'd expected for a starting position. Within a month, I'd found a small but charming apartment of my own. It wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom with good natural light for my artwork space, but it was mine. Every payday, I put a portion of my salary into savings. After watching my family's financial drama unfold, I was determined to build a secure future for myself. My first big project at the firm got rave reviews from the client, and I could feel my professional reputation growing. "See?" Grandma said when I showed her my first big client presentation. "This is what happens when you stick to your guns and follow your talent." The house of cards my parents had built finally came crashing down. 2 business loans, both secured against their house, became impossible to pay when my brother's ventures failed. I heard they're selling the house from Grandma during our weekly calls. Even after selling the house, they were still underwater. They started selling everything else: Mom's precious antique collection, Dad's beloved golf clubs, their matching luxury cars, even Mom's designer handbags she'd been so proud of. The real shock came when my brother announced he was moving to Arizona. "Can't help with the loans," he told them. "Those are in your names, not mine. I need a fresh start." I was at Grandma's house one Sunday afternoon, helping her organize her craft room, when a moving truck pulled up outside. Through the window, I watched in disbelief as my parents climbed out of their now ancient Toyota, the only vehicle they had left. "We're here," Mom announced, walking straight through Grandma's front door without knocking. "Where should we put our things?" Grandma stood in her hallway, arms crossed. "And what exactly do you think you're doing?" "Moving in, of course," Dad said, already directing movers with their boxes. "We have nowhere else to go." "Oh, really?" Grandma's voice could have frozen hell. "And who said you could live here?" Mom looked shocked. "Mom, we're your family. You can't turn us away. We lost everything because of those loans." "You mean the loans you took out to finance your precious son's half-baked schemes?" Grandma's eyebrow arched. "The same son who abandoned you to your debts." "Well," Mom said, lifting her chin, "it doesn't matter. I'm your only daughter, I'll inherit this house anyway. We might as well move in now." Grandma's laugh was sharp and cold. "Is that what you think? Let me clear something up for you right now. Every penny I have, every brick in this house, is going to Sandra. I've seen how you handle money. You and your son would burn through my life savings in months." Mom's face contorted with rage as she processed Grandma's words. Then she turned on me, her finger pointing accusingly. "You," she spat. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Turning my own mother against me, stealing my inheritance like a common thief." I stood there, feeling strangely calm in the face of her fury. Years ago, this would have reduced me to tears, but not anymore. "Mom, you need to leave." "Leave?" she shrieked. "Listen to you. Acting like you own this place already. Who do you think you are, giving orders in your grandmother's house?" Mom was on a roll now, years of resentment pouring out. "You ungrateful little snake. First you abandon the family business, then you turn my mother against me, and now you're standing there acting like you're better than us?" "Mom," I said quietly, "please leave. This isn't your house, and you're not welcome here." "Not welcome?" She laughed hysterically. "I'm her daughter, her only daughter, and you're just—" Before she could finish, Grandma stepped forward and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. "She's the only person who's ever felt truly at home here," she said firmly. "The only one who appreciated this house for more than its monetary value. The only one who filled it with creativity and joy instead of schemes and demands. Now, both of you, get out of my house. And take your boxes with you." They left, but not quietly. Mom cursed and ranted all the way down the driveway, while Dad tried to negotiate until the very end. Through it all, Grandma and I stood in the doorway, watching them load their boxes back into the truck. That was 3 years ago. Life has moved forward, as it tends to do. I'm still at Davidson Design Studio, where I've been promoted to lead designer on several major accounts. My latest project, rebranding a national coffee chain, just won an industry award. I haven't spoken to my parents or my brother since that day at Grandma's house. Sometimes I see posts from my brother on social media. He's always starting some new venture, always claiming this one will be his big break. My parents, I hear through family gossip, are living in a small apartment on the other side of town. But Grandma and I have only grown closer. Last month, I used some of my savings to help renovate her house. I designed everything myself, new color schemes, custom artwork for the walls, even some unique furniture pieces I commissioned from local artisans. Grandma loves showing it off to her friends. My granddaughter did all this, she tells everyone who visits. She designed everything herself. Didn't she do a wonderful job? Sometimes, when she's hosting her bridge club or her garden society meetings, I sit in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I used to do my homework after school, and listen to her proudly giving tours. It makes me smile every time. Yesterday, as we sat on her newly redesigned back porch, drinking tea and watching the sunset, she turned to me with a twinkle in her eye. "You know what the best investment I ever made was?" she asked. "What's that?" "Paying for your college education," she said, squeezing my hand. "Some people invest in stocks or real estate. I invested in your dreams. And look how well that turned out." I couldn't argue with that. Looking around at the beautiful space we'd created together, I felt completely at peace with all my choices. My name is Abigail Stewart, and I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, as they say. Not that I realized it at first. When you grow up wealthy, you think everyone lives like you do. Our family owned the largest chain of pharmacies in the state, Stewart Pharmaceuticals. It wasn't just a business, it was my grandfather's legacy. He built it from nothing, and my father David inherited it when I was just a kid. The business became my father's whole identity. He'd walk into our massive Victorian house after work, loosen his expensive tie, and start talking about profit margins before even saying hello. "Another record quarter," he'd announce at dinner, while my mother Margaret nodded approvingly, adjusting her pearl necklace. "This is what I'm going to pass down to my children someday." My older brother James would just push his food around the plate during these conversations. Even at 12, while I was still playing with dolls, he was more interested in ancient civilizations than profit margins. He'd try to change the subject to his latest archaeological discovery from the backyard, but Dad would just wave it off. I was different, though. Even as a kid, I loved helping out at the pharmacies. By the time I was 14, I knew all our regular customers by name and could recite our inventory like the alphabet. Dad noticed. "Now that's my girl," he'd beam when I'd tell him about helping an elderly customer find the right medication or suggesting a new display arrangement that increased sales. "She's got business in her blood." The shift happened gradually. As James buried himself deeper in history books and archaeological journals, Dad started bringing me to business meetings. By 16, I was doing inventory counts and helping with basic accounting. "Watch and learn, Abigail," Dad would say, showing me how to review contracts. "This will all be yours someday." My mother was thrilled too. "Finally, someone to carry on the family tradition properly," she'd say, giving me expensive business suits for my birthday while James got cheap history books. I remember the day James announced he was going to study archaeology in college. We were having dinner in our formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier that cost more than most cars. "You're what?" Dad exploded, his fork clattering against the fine china. "No son of mine is going to waste his life digging in the dirt." "David, please," Mom tried to calm him down, but her face showed she agreed with him. "It's what I love, Dad," James said quietly but firmly. "I've already been accepted to the program, and Professor Anderson says I have real potential." "Potential to be poor," Dad shouted. "We're business people, not dirt scholars." I watched James's face set in that determined way I knew meant his mind was made up. "Then I guess I'm not a business person," he said, standing up from the table. That was the night everything changed. Dad turned all his attention, and expectations, to me. I was no longer just the backup plan, I was the future of Stewart Pharmaceuticals. The pressure was intense, but I loved it. Or at least, I thought I did. Preston Business College was everything I'd dreamed of, prestigious, competitive, and full of other trust fund kids just like me. I felt right at home with my designer clothes and platinum credit card. That's when I met Zane. It was in the campus library, of all places. I was struggling with a coding assignment when this guy at the next table noticed me cursing under my breath at my laptop. "Need some help?" he asked, sliding into the chair next to me. He had the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen and a slight accent I couldn't place. That's how it started. Zane was brilliant. He'd gotten a full scholarship to study computer science and was at the top of his class. Everyone knew him. Professors would use his projects as examples. Other students would fight to have him on their team for group assignments. But he was so humble about it all. It took me 3 coffee study sessions to work up the courage to ask about his background. He told me matter-of-factly about his parents immigrating from Syria when he was little, about his dad working security and his mom cleaning houses. How he'd been coding since he was 12, teaching himself on a second-hand laptop. I used to do freelance work after school, he said. Had to help with the bills, you know? I didn't know, actually. I'd never had to worry about bills in my life. But something about the way he said it, no self-pity, just stating facts, made me admire him even more. We started dating a month later. Zane was different from the rich boys I'd grown up with. He opened doors because he was genuinely polite, not because etiquette class had drilled it into him. When he took me out, it was to small family-owned restaurants where the food was amazing and the owners knew him by name. 6 months in, he proposed. Not with some massive diamond like my dad would have expected, just a simple silver band he'd saved up for, given to me during a sunset walk through campus. It was perfect. Dad was thrilled when I told him I was engaged, at first. He immediately planned this huge family dinner to meet my fiancé, inviting all our relatives. I could practically hear him imagining some heir to a Fortune 500 company. The moment we walked into our massive dining room, I knew I was wrong. I watched my family's faces change, like someone had flipped a switch, from eager smiles to barely concealed sneers. My Aunt Patricia actually clutched her pearls. Mom's champagne glass froze halfway to her mouth. The silence was deafening until Dad cleared his throat. The sound echoed through our massive dining room like a gunshot. I could feel Zane's hand tense in mine under the table. So, young man, Dad said in that condescending tone he usually reserved for his employees, drawing out each word like he was speaking to a child, tell us about your background. Where exactly are you from? Zane sat up straighter, maintaining his dignity despite the hostile atmosphere. I admired how he kept his voice steady and respectful. My parents immigrated from Syria when I was young, sir. We've been here since I was 6. And what do your parents do? Dad pressed, his lip curling slightly. The crystal chandelier above us cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look almost sinister. My father works as a security guard at Atlantic Corp, and my mother works as a cleaner, Zane answered honestly. His voice remained firm and proud. I've worked part-time jobs since I was old enough to help support them. But I was fortunate to earn a full scholarship to Preston. My mother practically choked on her wine and grabbed her water glass, taking desperate gulps. The pearls around her neck trembled with each swallow. Aunt Patricia and Uncle George exchanged meaningful looks, while Cousin Rebecca actually snickered behind her manicured hand. Dad's face was getting redder by the second. The vein in his forehead, the one that only appeared when he was truly angry, began to pulse. Well, he said, pushing his plate away with such force that the expensive china rattled, I hope you understand, young man, that my Abigail is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. She's never wanted for anything. How exactly do you plan to provide for her? Before I could jump in, Zane responded calmly, his composure a stark contrast to my father's growing anger. I'm already successfully trading in cryptocurrency markets, Mr. Stewart. I built a substantial portfolio, and I'm developing plans for my own tech startup. Cryptocurrency? Dad interrupted with a harsh laugh that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls. You mean like what that scammer sold to Aunt Martha? The one who cleaned out her savings account? His voice dripped with contempt. Dad, that's completely different, I tried to explain, my heart pounding. Zane's actually incredibly knowledgeable about blockchain technology. He's even been asked to speak at tech conferences. Enough. Dad slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware jump. The sound made everyone at the table flinch, except Zane. I know a con man when I see one. Your Aunt Martha thought she knew better too, didn't she? Mr. Stewart, Zane attempted to explain, still maintaining his composure even as my father's face grew darker. I understand your concerns, but I assure you. No, you don't understand. Dad stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a screech that made my teeth hurt. He towered over the table, his hands planted firmly on the white tablecloth. You're not suitable for my daughter. You're a migrant from a poor family. You don't understand our values, our way of life. You're not one of us. I watched in horror as my father, the man who'd taught me about business ethics and professional conduct, showed his true colors. The worst part was seeing how the rest of my family nodded along, as if he was just saying what they were all thinking. Dad wasn't done. His face twisted with rage as he jabbed his finger in Zane's direction. I see right through you, you know that? You're just another gold digger with a sob story, trying to get your hands on my daughter's inheritance. David, please, Mom interrupted, but not to defend Zane. She turned to me with what she probably thought was a motherly expression. Honey, you're too young for marriage. Finish college first, come work at the company like we planned. There's plenty of time to think about marriage, with someone more suitable. Uncle George cleared his throat. He's probably just after the pharmacy chain, David. These people are clever that way. Remember the Martinez boy who tried dating Rebecca? Aunt Patricia chimed in, talking about Zane as if he wasn't even there. Same thing, all charm until they get what they want. I watched Zane's face as my family continued their verbal assault. He sat perfectly still, his expression composed, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his knuckles whitened as he gripped his water glass. What kind of future could you possibly offer her? Dad sneered. Living in some tiny apartment, eating microwave dinners, while you waste time on your imaginary internet money? That was it. Something inside me snapped. I stood up so quickly, my chair fell backward with a crash. Stop it. All of you, just stop. My voice shook with rage. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You're acting like entitled, prejudiced snobs. Abigail, Mom gasped, clutching her pearls. No, Mom, I'm done. I reached for Zane's hand. I've never been more embarrassed to be part of this family than I am right now. Come on, Zane, we're leaving. We walked toward the door, heads held high, while my relatives muttered and whispered behind us. Dad's voice boomed through the foyer as we reached for our coats. You walk out that door with him, Abigail, and you'll regret it. Do you hear me? After everything we've invested in you? All the money we spent on your education, your future? You owe us. I turned back one last time, meeting his furious gaze. The only thing I owe you is the courtesy of walking out instead of telling you exactly what I think of you right now. I heard him shouting about debts and obligations as we walked to Zane's car, but I didn't look back. Some debts, I was learning, weren't worth paying. A year flew by like a dream. Zane and I finished college, him with highest honors in computer science, me with my business degree. We'd moved into a modest apartment, and despite my family's dire predictions, we were happy. So when Zane suggested we stop waiting and get married that summer, I didn't hesitate. I spent hours crafting the perfect wedding announcement for social media. I posted a beautiful engagement photo of us, with a heartfelt message about love transcending boundaries. The responses started rolling in almost immediately. Not congratulations, attacks. Cousin Rebecca, I can't believe you're still with that fortune hunter. Count me out. Aunt Patricia, your poor parents must be so disappointed. We raised you better than this. Uncle George, no self-respecting Stewart would attend this travesty. My phone kept buzzing with notifications, each one more cruel than the last. I finally had to turn it off when my mother's comment appeared, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Don't expect us there." I cried for hours that night, while Zane held me and whispered that we could postpone, that maybe they just needed more time. But I was done waiting for my family to change. No, I said, wiping my eyes. We're getting married. with or without them. I didn't expect James to come. My brother was in the middle of an important dig in Egypt, something about a previously undiscovered tomb. But 2 days before the wedding, he showed up at our apartment door, covered in desert dust and grinning. "You think I'd miss my little sister's wedding?" he said, pulling me into a bear hug. "Besides, someone's got to walk you down the aisle." The wedding was small but beautiful. We held it in a garden, with fairy lights twinkling in the trees. Zane's family filled one side of the aisle, warm, welcoming people who had embraced me as their own from day one. My side was painfully empty, save for James and a couple of distant cousins who had dared to defy the family boycott. A year passed. Zane's tech career was taking off, and I'd started my own small business consultancy. We were building our life together, brick by brick, without any help from the Stewart fortune. Then the invitation came. "Your presence is requested at the 60th birthday celebration of David Stewart." My hand shook as I read it. After all this time, were they finally ready to make peace? I showed it to Zane, who squeezed my hand. "It's your call, love," he said softly. "But whatever you decide, we face it together." The night of the party, we dressed our best. I spent hours picking out the perfect gift, a rare first edition of my father's favorite business book, something that showed I still remembered, still cared. We walked into that familiar house, my heart pounding with nervous anticipation. The room fell silent when we entered, just like that first dinner, but I pushed ahead. With trembling hands, I presented the carefully wrapped package to my father. He didn't even look at it. Just picked it up and tossed it aside like it was garbage, the beautiful paper crinkling as it landed among the other gifts. The dinner started like a perfectly choreographed show of cruelty. Every question, every comment was designed to wound. I watched in horror as my family took turns trying to break my husband's spirit. "So," Uncle George drawled, swirling his expensive wine, "still playing with your internet money, or have you found a real job yet?" Before Zane could answer, Aunt Patricia chimed in. "Dear, do you know which fork to use for the salad?" She giggled, nudging my cousin Rebecca. "These fancy dinners must be quite different from what you're used to." "That's quite a simple suit you're wearing," my mother observed with a smirk. "I suppose designer labels aren't in your budget?" "I wonder," cousin Rebecca piped up, "have you ever even eaten truffle before tonight? They're quite expensive, you know." I watched Zane's face remain perfectly composed, even as they treated him like some sort of circus attraction. He'd built a successful life from nothing, earned every bit of respect he had in the tech world, and here they were, acting like he was beneath them because he didn't inherit his success. The breaking point came when my father raised his glass. "You know," he announced to the table, loud enough to silence everyone, "I always wondered what would happen to my daughter if she married beneath her station. Tell me, boy, does she miss her credit cards? Her shopping sprees? Or have you managed to save enough from your little computer games to keep her in the lifestyle she deserves?" Something snapped inside me. I stood up so fast, my chair toppled backward. "How dare you?" I was shaking with rage. "You sit here in your expensive clothes, in your massive house, acting like you're better than everyone else, when you're nothing but small, cruel people who've never earned a single thing in your lives." The room went dead silent. "You think wealth makes you worthy? Look at yourselves. You're all so busy showing off your money that you've forgotten how to be human beings." Dad's face turned purple. He stood up, matching my stance. "That's enough. I've had it with your ingratitude, your poor choices, your defense of this fortune hunter." He turned to face the table, raising his voice even louder. "Let me make this absolutely clear, as of this moment, Abigail Stewart is no longer my daughter. She is disinherited, cut off completely." Then, with a theatrical flourish, he gestured to my cousin Michael, who'd been quietly preening at the other end of the table. "This is my new successor. My nephew, who understands the value of family tradition, of maintaining our standards." The relatives burst into applause as Michael stood, bowing slightly. "Thank you, Uncle David. I won't let you down like some people have." I looked around the table at these people I'd once called family. At my mother, clapping enthusiastically for my replacement. At my cousins, smirking with satisfaction. At my aunts and uncles, nodding approvingly at my public humiliation. "Come on, Zane," I said, taking my husband's hand. "We're done here. Permanently." The next few years passed like a whirlwind. Zane's cryptocurrency investments had been just the beginning. He used that capital to launch his own tech company, developing innovative AI solutions for businesses. Within 3 years, TechVision Enterprises was valued at over $500 million. The same internet money my father had mocked had transformed into an empire. I watched with pride as my husband's name began appearing in business magazines and tech journals. 30 Under 30, Most Innovative CEO, Tech Visionary of the Year, the accolades kept coming. But what made me proudest was how success hadn't changed him. He still opened doors for people, still remembered every employee's name, still wore simple clothes, though now they were tastefully expensive rather than cheap. I wanted to find my father and show him all these headlines. Show him how wrong he'd been. But we hadn't spoken since that disastrous birthday dinner, and honestly, I'd found peace in that silence. Then the invitation arrived. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Rebecca Stewart." I stared at the thick cream envelope in disbelief. The same cousin who'd mocked Zane's table manners, who'd made snide comments about his clothes, was now inviting us to her wedding? "Look what came in the mail," I said to Zane that evening, holding up the invitation. He read it carefully, then looked at me with those kind eyes I'd fallen in love with years ago. "Maybe we should go. In my culture, we believe family is sacred, even when they hurt us." So there we were, walking into the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, where Rebecca's wedding was being held. The reaction was unexpected. "Oh my God, is that Zane Hassan? The TechVision CEO? Did you see his interview in Tech Weekly? I heard he just closed a deal with Microsoft. Can I get a picture with you, Mr. Hassan?" The same relatives who'd once looked down their noses at my poor immigrant husband were now falling over themselves to get his attention. Former critics were now eager fans, shoving business cards into his hands, asking for investment advice, begging for photos. I watched as Zane handled it all with characteristic grace, smiling for photos, answering questions politely, making everyone feel heard and respected, even those who'd never shown him the same courtesy. "Your husband is absolutely brilliant," gushed Aunt Patricia, the same aunt who'd mocked his table manners years ago. "Did you know he was featured in Forbes?" I just smiled, thinking how funny life can be. The fortune hunter they'd accused him of being had built his own fortune, bigger than anything the Stewarts had ever imagined. But unlike them, he wore his success with humility and kindness. I should have known something was off when my parents made a beeline for our table. Mom was wearing her most ingratiating smile, the one she usually reserved for wealthy potential investors, while Dad had plastered on his best business face. "Darling," Mom cooed, air-kissing my cheeks. "And Zane? We've been following your incredible success in the news. So proud to call you family." I couldn't help myself. "Really? The same poor immigrant you couldn't bear to have at your table a few years ago?" They flinched, but recovered quickly. Dad cleared his throat, loosening his collar, which, I noticed, wasn't from his usual luxury brand. "Water under the bridge, sweetheart. Family is family, right?" Then came the real reason for their sudden change of heart. Over the wedding appetizers, the story spilled out. Michael, their precious replacement heir, had nearly destroyed Stewart Pharmaceuticals. In his eagerness to cut costs, he'd signed contracts with shady suppliers. Now they were facing multiple lawsuits for selling counterfeit medications. "The FDA is investigating," Dad said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The banks won't touch us. We're in trouble, princess. The legal fees alone." Mom dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "We've had to mortgage everything." Dad reached across the table, placing his hand over Zane's. "Son, I know we got off on the wrong foot, but you're family. And family helps family, right? We just need a loan to tide us over. A few million should do it. I saw Zane's face soften with sympathy. My husband, always so quick to forgive, was already reaching for his checkbook. I placed my hand over his, stopping him. Family helps family? I repeated, my voice ice cold. Funny, I remember you specifically saying we weren't family anymore. In fact, didn't you disown me? Twice? Now, Abigail, Dad's voice took on that warning tone from my childhood, after everything we'd done for you. You taught me some valuable lessons, Dad, I cut him off. Like how not to give money to strangers. Isn't that what you always said? His face turned that familiar shade of purple. You ungrateful little. And about keeping high standards, I continued, my voice carrying just as the wedding DJ asked everyone to raise their glasses to the happy couple. So I'm sorry, but I don't associate with people who sell fake medications to sick people just to save a buck. Dad exploded, jumping to his feet. How dare you? After everything I've done for you. I raised you, educated you. And disowned me, I finished, standing calmly. Twice. Let's make it 3 times, you can disown me again if you'd like, but it won't change my answer. Taking Zane's hand, we walked out of the reception, my father's curses following us just like they had years ago. Only this time, I was smiling. That was 3 years ago. James keeps me updated on family news, not that I ask. The mighty Stewart Pharmaceuticals went bankrupt. The mansion where I grew up was sold at auction. Dad and Mom downsized to a condo, selling their luxury cars and Mom's precious jewelry to pay legal fees. Sometimes I think about that dinner years ago, when Dad called Zane a fortune hunter. Life has a funny way of showing us who people really are. My poor immigrant husband built an empire through hard work and integrity, while my respectable family lost everything through greed and shortcuts. But you know what? I learned that real wealth isn't about money at all. It's about having people in your life who stand by you when it matters, who lift you up instead of tearing you down. By that measure, I'm the richest woman in the world. I've been holding this story inside for years, but recent events have made me realize I need to share it. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through something similar. It's long, so I'll break it into parts. Growing up, everything in my life revolved around reputation. My parents were both teachers at Riverside Prep, one of those prestigious private schools where politicians and CEOs send their kids. Mom taught AP English, Dad was head of the mathematics department, and their status at the school was everything to them. Cindy, remember who you are, Mom would say whenever I did anything slightly out of line. You're a teacher's daughter. People are always watching. I can't count how many times I heard that phrase growing up. It was like a mantra in our house, right up there with straight A's aren't an achievement, they're an expectation, and your behavior reflects on all of us. I was their only child, their perfect little project. They monitored everything, my grades, my friends, my clothes, even my posture at dinner parties. Looking back, I should have seen the signs of how controlling they were, but when you're raised in that environment, it all seems normal. Things really started looking up in my junior year of high school, when I began dating James Mitchell. His father owned half the real estate in our city's downtown, and his mother was on the school board. My parents were ecstatic. This is exactly the kind of connection we've been hoping for, Mom told me one night while I was doing homework. The Mitchells are such a respectable family. And James is so focused on his future. Dad nodded along, adding, just think, Cindy. If things work out, you could have such a wonderful life ahead of you. James and I actually got along great at first. He was smart, funny, and seemed to understand the pressure of having parents with high expectations. We'd spend hours talking about our plans for the future. He wanted to go into commercial real estate like his father, and I was planning to become a financial analyst. We could be such a power couple, he'd say, half joking, but not really. The real estate mogul and his brilliant financial advisor wife. Our parents loved to get together for dinner, planning our futures while we sat there, nodding and smiling. Everything was perfect on the surface. Just like they wanted it. I graduated as valedictorian, got accepted into Winston College's prestigious business program, and started my freshman year with James at the same school. Our parents couldn't have been prouder. They'd achieved their goal, their daughter was on track for the perfect life they'd planned. College life started out exactly as planned. James and I both threw ourselves into our studies at Winston, and everything felt like it was falling perfectly into place. My business analytics professors praised my work, and I was maintaining that perfect GPA my parents expected. James and I spent most of our free time together, and our relationship grew more serious. By the middle of sophomore year, we'd become intimate. It felt like a natural progression. We'd been dating for almost 3 years at that point, and we talked about marriage after graduation like it was a foregone conclusion. I was 19, in love, and thought I had it all figured out. Then came the morning sickness. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just stress or a stomach bug. But after 2 weeks of running to the bathroom between classes, I couldn't deny it anymore. I bought 3 different pregnancy tests from a pharmacy across town, not wanting to risk running into anyone I knew. I still remember sitting on my dorm room floor, staring at those little pink lines. Positive. All 3 of them. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely text James to come over. "You're what?" His face went pale when I told him. No. This can't be happening. Not now." "I know it's not ideal timing," I said, trying to stay calm. "But we can figure this out together. We've always talked about having a family eventually." "Eventually," James cut me off. "Yeah, after college, after I've taken over Dad's business, after we're married and established. Not now. Do you know what this would do to my future?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "What about our future?" "There's only one solution here," he said, pacing my small dorm room. "You need to get an abortion. We can't have a baby now. It would ruin everything." "No," I said firmly. "I won't do that. This is our child." "My parents will cut me off if they find out about this," he interrupted. "Everything I've worked for will be gone. You can't do this to me, Cindy." But someone had already done it to me. While James and I were arguing, my phone started buzzing. My mom's name flashed on the screen. "Come home, now." Her voice was ice cold. "We need to discuss this situation." I felt sick. "How did you?" James called his parents. "They called us. Come home immediately or we'll come get you ourselves." The drive home was the longest 2 hours of my life. When I walked through my parents' front door, I found both sets of parents waiting for me. The look of disgust on their faces made me want to disappear. "How dare you?" My mother's voice shook with rage. "How dare you disgrace us like this?" "You stupid girl," my father spat out. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation at school?" Mrs. Mitchell was crying dramatically. "Our James has such a bright future ahead of him. He can't be tied down with a baby now." "I'll raise the baby myself," I said, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach. "I don't expect anything from James or any of you." "A single mother?" My mother laughed bitterly. "Our daughter, a single mother? Is that what we raised? A little whore who spreads her legs and ruins her life." "We won't allow it," my father declared. "We will not have our reputation destroyed by your irresponsible behavior." "Reputation?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is your grandchild we're talking about." "No," Mrs. Mitchell said firmly. "This is a mistake that needs to be corrected. James has his whole life ahead of him. This thing would ruin everything." The discussion went on for hours. It wasn't really a discussion though, it was more like a coordinated attack. "Think about your future, Cindy," my father kept saying. "How do you plan to support a child? Where will you live? We won't continue paying for your education if you insist on keeping it," my mother added. "Is that what you want? To throw away your entire future?" I sat there on our living room couch, the same couch where I'd spent countless hours studying for tests and planning my perfect future. I could get a job, take a break from school. And live where? My mother's voice was sharp. Certainly not here. We won't have you bringing that kind of shame into our home. Maybe one of my aunts. I started, but my voice trailed off. Dad was an only child, and Mom's sisters both lived overseas. I had nowhere to go. James sat silently through most of it, staring at the floor. His parents did all the talking for him. James has an internship lined up with Morgan and Reed Investments next summer, his father kept saying. Do you want to ruin that for him? Is that how little you care about his future? They wore me down, bit by bit. Every plan I suggested was shot down. Every possibility I brought up was crushed. No job would pay enough. No apartment would be affordable. No future would be possible. Finally, my mother drove me to the clinic herself. The doctor was professional, but concerned during the initial exam. I need to inform you, she said quietly, looking directly at me, that this procedure could impact your ability to conceive in the future. There are potential risks. We've discussed all that, my mother interrupted. We've made our decision. The doctor looked at me. Ms. Thompson, I need to hear from you. Do you understand the risks? I couldn't speak. I just nodded. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I recovered physically, returned to Winston for the spring semester, and threw myself into my studies. James tried to talk to me once, mumbling something about how it was for the best, but I walked away mid-sentence. We never spoke again. During spring break, instead of going home, I got a job as a barista at a coffee shop near campus. I picked up shifts during every holiday after that. My parents didn't object, they seemed relieved not to have me around. As long as I maintained my GPA and didn't cause any more problems, they were content to keep paying my tuition. We're glad you finally came to your senses, my mother said during one of our brief phone calls. Everything worked out for the best. But nothing felt like the best. Nothing felt right anymore. I went through the motions, got my assignments done, kept my perfect grades. But something inside me had broken, and I knew it would never be the same. After graduation, I landed a position as a financial analyst at Morgan and Reed Investments. Ironic, considering it was one of the firms James had been so desperate to intern with. But I'd earned my spot on my own merit, graduating summa cum laude and impressing during my interviews. Life settled into a comfortable routine. I buried myself in work, analyzing market trends and building financial models. My apartment became my sanctuary, no judgment, no expectations beyond my own. Then came the night of the company's annual holiday gala. I almost didn't go, but my team leader insisted. You can't keep hiding behind those spreadsheets forever, Cindy, she said. That's where I met David. He was one of the firm's partners, but not the stuffy, arrogant type I'd expected. He was discussing basketball with the custodial staff when I first saw him, genuinely interested in their March Madness predictions. I hope I'm not interrupting a serious strategic meeting, I joked, needing to get his signature on some reports. He looked up with the warmest smile I'd ever seen. Actually, Jose here was just explaining why my bracket is going to be a complete disaster this year. We started dating a month later. David was different from anyone I'd ever known, genuine, kind, and completely unconcerned with status or appearances. When he proposed a year later, it was over takeout Chinese food in my tiny apartment. I don't need a big wedding, I told him. Just us. And that's what we did. A simple ceremony at the courthouse, with his sister and best friend as witnesses. No elaborate dresses, no society photographers, no concerned whispers about reputation. Just love and honesty. I didn't tell my parents. By then, we were down to exchanging brief birthday and Christmas texts. They didn't ask about my life, and I didn't volunteer information. Then, 3 years into our marriage, my mother called. Your father's sick, she said without preamble. He needs surgery. You should come. David squeezed my hand as we pulled up to my childhood home. It looked exactly the same, perfectly manicured lawn, pristine white trim, not a single thing out of place. My mother's eyes widened when she saw David step out of the car. "Who's this?" "My husband," I said simply. "We've been married for 3 years." What followed was a fascinating transformation. First came the hurt accusations about being excluded from the wedding. But as soon as David mentioned his position as executive director, and they realized I was now a senior financial analyst, their tone completely changed. "Oh, darling, we've missed you so much," my mother gushed, as if the last several years of silence hadn't happened. "You must come visit more often." Then came the real reason for the call. Dad needed expensive surgery, and their insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Could I help? After all, I was doing so well now. I agreed to help with the medical bills. Maybe it was weakness, maybe it was forgiveness, or maybe I just wanted to prove I'd succeeded despite everything. Dad looked genuinely grateful, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe the past could stay in the past. After Dad's recovery, David and I started talking about having a family of our own. We both wanted children, and the timing felt right. But month after month, nothing happened. At first, we tried not to worry. "These things take time," David would say, staying positive. But after a year of disappointment, we decided to see a fertility specialist. Dr. Martinez was kind but thorough. She ran various tests and took a detailed medical history. Then came the question I'd been dreading. "Have you ever had any pregnancies or terminations?" My throat went dry. David didn't know about what had happened in college. I'd never found the right time to tell him. But sitting there in that sterile office, the truth had to come out. "Yes," I whispered. "An abortion. When I was 19. Dr. Martinez nodded professionally, making notes. After reviewing all the test results, she delivered the news that shattered my world. "The termination procedure you had resulted in some complications," she explained gently. "Combined with the scarring that developed afterward, I'm afraid your chances of conceiving are virtually non-existent." I felt the room spin. All those years ago, the doctor at the clinic had warned about risks, but my mother had dismissed them. Now here I was, paying the price for a choice that had never really been mine. That evening, I had to tell David everything. We sat on our back porch, the same spot where we usually planned our future, and I confessed it all: the pregnancy in college, my parents' reaction, the coerced abortion. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed. "I should have told you sooner. I understand if this changes things." David pulled me into his arms, cutting off my words. "Hey, look at me," he said softly. "Nothing could change how I feel about you. Nothing." We sat in silence for a while, his arms around me, before he spoke again. "You know, there are other ways to build a family. We could look into adoption. Give a home to a child who needs one." His words were like a lifeline. We spent that night researching adoption agencies and requirements, making plans for a different kind of future than we'd imagined, but one filled with just as much love. Meanwhile, my newly rekindled relationship with my parents took on an uncomfortable pattern. Every visit included the same question: "So, when are you going to give us grandchildren?" I'd deflect, change the subject, talk about work or Dad's recovery, anything to avoid the truth. They'd already proven they cared more about appearances than their own grandchild once before. I wasn't about to give them another chance to judge my choices. Even though Dad had fully recovered, I kept sending them money every month. Maybe it was habit, maybe it was guilt, or maybe some part of me still hoped that financial success would finally earn their genuine approval. The Thanksgiving invitation came as a surprise. My parents rarely hosted holidays anymore, claiming they were too exhausting. But this year, my mother insisted we come. "We're having a few friends over," she said. "Nothing fancy, just some colleagues from school and their families." I should have known better. When we arrived, the house was packed with at least 30 people, all pillars of the local education community, all part of my parents' carefully curated social circle. The evening started predictably enough. Everyone commented on how successful I'd become, how impressive David's position was, how proud my parents must be. The same shallow conversations I'd grown up with. Then came the moment that changed everything. My mother cornered us by the dessert table, wine glass in hand, speaking just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You know, Cindy, Mrs. Peterson was just showing me pictures of her new grandson. Absolutely adorable. When are you and David going to give us grandchildren? Everyone else our age is already enjoying grandparenthood." Before I could deflect, David squeezed my hand and answered honestly. "Actually, we're looking into adoption. We've already started the application process." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went through several shades of red before she practically shouted, "Adoption? Have you lost your mind?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. My mother seized the audience's attention like the experienced teacher she was. "Everyone, can you believe this? My daughter, who could give us perfectly good grandchildren of her own, wants to adopt instead." "Mom, please," I hissed. "This isn't the time or place." Dad stormed over from his position by the fireplace. "What's this nonsense about adoption? Are you trying to embarrass us again? Do you have any idea what kind of background these children come from? Drug addicts, criminals, mentally ill parents, is that what you want to bring into this family?" "You're making a scene," I said firmly. "This is a private matter." But the damage was done. My parents' friends, loosened by holiday drinks and encouraged by my parents' reaction, started chiming in. "You really should have your own children, dear," Mrs. Peterson offered. "You never know what you're getting with adopted kids." "My cousin's friend adopted," another guest added. "Terrible mistake. The child had all sorts of problems." "Think about your family legacy," someone else called out. My parents stood there nodding along, clearly pleased that their social circle was backing them up. The same smug expressions they'd worn all those years ago, when they'd had others gang up on me about my pregnancy. Something inside me snapped. "You want to know why we're adopting?" My voice cut through the murmur of judgmental whispers. "You really want to know? Fine, I'll tell you all exactly why." The room went deadly quiet. I could see the warning in my mother's eyes, but I was done protecting their reputation. "I can't have children because of complications from an abortion I had when I was 19. An abortion that you, both of you, forced me to have because you were more concerned about what the neighbors would think than about your own daughter and grandchild." Someone gasped. Mrs. Peterson's wine glass froze halfway to her mouth. "You threatened to kick me out, cut off my education, leave me with nothing unless I took care of the problem," I continued, my voice shaking but clear. "The doctor warned there could be complications, but Mom, you remember what you said? We've made our decision." "Not me. We. You and Dad and the Mitchells, all deciding what would happen to my body, my baby, my future." I turned to address the shocked faces around the room. "So yes, we're adopting. Because thanks to my parents' desperate need to maintain their precious reputation, that's my only option for having a family now." The silence that followed was deafening. Then my mother did something I should have expected but still caught me off guard. She went on the attack. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "How dare you come into my home and tell such vicious lies? You ungrateful girl." She turned to her guests, hands trembling. "She's lying. She's always been troubled, always trying to blame others for her mistakes. She got herself into trouble and had an abortion without even telling us until after the fact. We would never." "Are you serious?" I cut her off. "You're really going to stand there and lie? In front of all these people? David, show them the medical records." My husband pulled out his phone where we'd saved copies of my old medical files, documentation I'd gotten from the clinic for our fertility specialist. But before he could pull them up, my mother completely lost it. "Get out," she screamed. "Get out of my house right now. You've ruined everything, again. Just like you always do. Get out." As David and I walked to the car, I could hear my mother trying to do damage control inside, her voice high and panicked as she offered more drinks to her guests. My father didn't say a word, he just stood there, silent as always when it really mattered. The drive home was quiet. David held my hand the entire way, not pushing me to talk, just being there. When we finally got home, I went straight to my laptop and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents' account. It took exactly 2 months for my mother to call. I was in the middle of reviewing our home study paperwork for the adoption agency when her name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. But part of me wanted to hear what she could possibly have to say after Thanksgiving. The Petersons withdrew their son from the school, she began without even a hello. Mrs. Chen isn't inviting me to her book club anymore. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation? I actually laughed. After everything, she was still only concerned about reputation. Your father and I deserve compensation for this damage you've caused, she continued. The monthly support you were providing barely covers the social costs we're incurring. People are treating us differently at work. We've had to explain things, to make excuses. Excuses? I cut in. You mean lies? Like the lies you told at Thanksgiving? Or the lies you've been telling yourselves all these years about what you did to me? We did what was best for you. And this is how you repay us? By spreading vicious stories and then cutting us off financially? What was best for me? My voice was steady now, calmer than I'd ever been when speaking to her. Do you know what David and I did last week? We met with a therapist who specializes in helping adoptive parents deal with infertility grief. She helped me understand something important. What you did wasn't just about the abortion. It was about control. It's always been about control. Don't you dare. The money was just another form of control, I continued. As long as I was paying you, you felt like you still had power over me. Well, that's done now. I'm done. You ungrateful little. I'm blocking your number after this call, I said. Both of yours. David and I are in the final stages of our adoption home study. In a few months, we'll hopefully be matched with a child who needs a home. A child who will never have to worry about family reputation being more important than their well-being. A child who will be loved unconditionally. You're making a huge mistake, she hissed. When you realize that, don't come crawling back. I ended the call mid-sentence and blocked both their numbers immediately. Then I went back to my adoption paperwork with a lighter heart than I'd had in years. That was 6 months ago. Today, David and I are finishing up the nursery for the baby girl we'll be welcoming next month. Her birth mother chose us specifically because of our story. She wanted her daughter to be raised by parents who understood that love is more important than appearances. Sometimes I think about my parents, about what they're missing out on. But then I remember, they made their choice a long time ago. They chose reputation over love, appearances over family. I'm choosing differently. My daughter will grow up knowing she is wanted, cherished, and accepted exactly as she is. No conditions. No expectations. No concern for what the neighbors might think. Final edit, our daughter is home with us now. She's perfect. My name is Brittany, and I often think about how different my life could have been if my mom hadn't gotten sick. She passed away when I was 6, and that's when everything changed. Our house used to be full of her laughter, and the photos of our happy family covered every wall. Dad took it really hard. For months, he barely spoke, just went to work and came back home, where I tried my best to be quiet and not bother him. I didn't really understand death back then. I kept asking when Mom would come back from heaven. Dad would just hug me tight and say nothing. Then he met Sandra at some work event. She started coming over for dinner, and I noticed Dad smiling more. I guess that's why I didn't say anything when, one by one, Mom's photos started disappearing from the walls, replaced by new ones with Sandra in them. Brittany, Sandra, and I have something to tell you, Dad said one evening. They sat me down in our living room, and I remember playing with the hem of my dress, feeling nervous. Sandra and I are getting married. She's going to live with us and be your new mom. You'll see, everything will be wonderful. But it wasn't wonderful. As soon as they got back from their honeymoon, Sandra started changing things. She rearranged all the furniture, repainted the walls, and set up what she called house rules. "Brittany, your room is a mess again," she'd say every morning. "A young lady should keep her space tidy. And please keep your voice down when you're playing, I have a headache." I always had to help with chores, even though I was just 6. When I complained to Dad, he'd just say, "Listen to Sandra, honey. She knows what's best for you." One day, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out the words. "She's just not adjusting well, John," Sandra was saying. "Maybe it would be better if she lived with your mother? She's always saying how much she misses having family around." No, Dad's voice was quiet. "I promised Sarah, I promised her before I swore I'd take care of Brittany. And there's the money she left for Brittany's college. I gave my word it would go to her education. I didn't know it then, but things were about to get even harder." A year later, Sandra got pregnant, and everything changed again. Dad was over the moon, and Sandra couldn't stop talking about how she was finally going to have her own child. Those words hurt more than any chore or rule she'd ever given me. Because that's what I was to her, someone else's child. Not her own, never her own. When Emma was born, I was 8 years old. I remember standing in the hospital hallway with Dad, peering through the nursery window at my new baby sister. She was so tiny, wrapped in a pink blanket, and Dad couldn't stop smiling. "You're a big sister now, Brittany," he said proudly. "You'll help take care of Emma, won't you?" I nodded eagerly, not understanding what that really meant. But I found out pretty quickly when they brought Emma home. Sandra wasted no time in turning me into her personal assistant. "Brittany, bring me fresh diapers. Brittany, wash these bottles. Brittany, hold Emma while I make a phone call." The demands never stopped. By the time I was 9, I knew how to change diapers, prepare baby formula, and cook simple baby food. While other kids my age were playing outside after school, I was mashing bananas and stirring rice cereal for Emma. "But I want to go to Sarah's birthday party," I remember pleading one Saturday. "Emma needs you here," Sandra said firmly. "She's teething and fussy. Besides, someone needs to clean up the mess she made in the playroom." As Emma grew, so did my responsibilities. I had to watch her constantly, making sure she didn't fall while learning to walk or put dangerous things in her mouth. Meanwhile, Emma was showered with attention and gifts. Every tantrum was rewarded with a new toy or treat. When she turned 4, Emma realized she could get me in trouble whenever she wanted. And boy, did she use that power. One time, she deliberately spilled her juice all over her new dress, then ran crying to Sandra. "Brittany pushed me," she wailed. I spent that weekend grounded in my room. Another time, she broke her expensive musical toy and blamed me. "Brittany was playing with it when it broke," she claimed. It didn't matter that I was doing homework at the time, I lost my allowance for a month to pay for a replacement. The worst was when she cut up her own party dress with scissors, then hid the scissors in my backpack. Sandra found them during one of her room inspections. "How could you be so jealous?" Sandra yelled at me. "Do you know how much that dress cost?" But I didn't, I tried to explain. "Go to your room," Dad interrupted. "We'll discuss your punishment later." Emma stood in the doorway, smirking at me as I walked past. She'd learned early that she could get away with anything, while I'd get blamed for everything. Grandma Rose was my only escape from the madness at home. Every weekend I spent at her house felt like stepping into a different world, one where I could just be a kid. She lived in a cozy house filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies and unconditional love. "Look at you, skin and bones," she'd say, loading my plate with pancakes. "That woman's got you running around like Cinderella." Unlike at home, at Grandma's house, I could laugh as loud as I wanted and didn't have to watch my every step. When Emma visited with me once, she quickly learned that her usual tricks wouldn't work there. But I want ice cream before dinner, Emma had whined, stomping her feet. Young lady, Grandma said firmly, in this house, we eat our dinner first. And there's no rewards for tantrums. Emma never came back after that. Grandma's house is boring, she told our parents. What she meant was that Grandma's house had rules that applied to everyone equally. Then came the day that changed everything. Emma had thrown a particularly dramatic fit about doing her homework, and Grandma happened to be visiting. John, Grandma said to Dad, her voice stern, that child is terribly spoiled. Sandra, you need to handle this better. You're raising a little tyrant. Sandra's face turned red. How dare you criticize my parenting? You have no right. I have every right when I see my granddaughters being treated so differently, Grandma shot back. Look at what you're doing to Brittany. That night, I heard more shouting from downstairs. Sandra was crying, saying she wouldn't tolerate such disrespect. Dad, as usual, took her side. The next day, Sandra announced that we would no longer be visiting Grandma Rose. But that's not fair, I protested. Life isn't fair, Sandra snapped. And if I catch you trying to contact her, you'll be grounded until college. College. That word became my lifeline during the next couple of years. I threw myself into studying, counting down the days until graduation. Mom had left money for my education, I'd overheard Dad talking about it enough times. That money was my ticket out. Then came graduation day. I was still in my cap and gown when Dad and Sandra sat me down for a serious talk. About college, Dad started, not meeting my eyes. We've decided to save that money for Emma's education instead. The world stopped. What? Your sister has such bright prospects, Sandra added smoothly. And you, well, you're more suited for practical work. Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I screamed. That's my money. Mom left it for me. You promised her, Dad. You're just a liar. You ungrateful girl, Dad shouted, his face red. After everything we've done for you. Get out. Tomorrow you can start your adult life somewhere else. I didn't wait for tomorrow. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes and essentials into my backpack, grabbed the hidden photo of Mom, and walked out. My friend Jenny had always said I could stay with her family if things got bad, and now things had gotten as bad as they could get. Life as a waitress wasn't what I'd dreamed of doing after high school, but it paid the bills, barely. I started at the Silver Spoon, a busy downtown restaurant, working double shifts whenever I could. My feet ached every night, and I smelled like French fries and burger grease, but at least I was free. Jenny's parents were amazing, letting me stay with them for those first few months. But I knew I couldn't impose forever. That's when I met Maria, another waitress at the restaurant, who was looking for a roommate. The apartment's tiny, she warned me, and the neighbors are loud, but it's cheap. She wasn't kidding about tiny. Our shared apartment could barely fit 2 beds and a couch. But it was ours, and neither of us had to answer to anyone else. We worked the same shifts, shared grocery bills, and somehow made it work. Any plans for school? Maria would ask sometimes, as we counted our tips after closing. I'd just shake my head. With rent, utilities, and food, I could barely save anything. College felt like a distant dream that had died the night I left home. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. I almost dropped the coffee pot I was holding when I saw the number. Brittany, sweetheart, I've been trying to track you down. How's college going? My throat tightened. I'm not in college, Grandma. What do you mean? Your father had Sarah's money set aside. I found myself telling her everything, the fight, getting kicked out, working as a waitress. By the end, I was crying in the restaurant's break room, and Grandma was silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. Those miserable, selfish. She finally said, her voice shaking with anger. Listen to me, Brittany. I'm paying for your college. No arguments. Grandma, no, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm doing it. Your mother was like a daughter to me, and I won't let them steal your future. Have you looked at any schools? I could try the local university. They have evening classes. Perfect. We'll get you enrolled for next semester. But Brittany? She paused. Let's keep this between us. I don't want to deal with your father or that woman. I laughed through my tears. Trust me, Grandma, neither do I. So that's how I became a full-time waitress and a part-time student. My days started at 5 a.m. with studying, then classes, then straight to work until closing. I'd come home exhausted, feet blistered, smelling like restaurant food, only to crack open my books again. Maria thought I was crazy. Girl, when do you sleep? Sleep is for the weak, I'd joke, downing my third cup of coffee. But for the first time since I'd left home, I felt like I was moving forward. Every test I passed, every paper I turned in, felt like a small victory. Not just for me, but for Mom too. I might not have gotten to use her money, but I was still going to get the education she'd wanted for me. And the best part? Nobody from my family knew. They probably imagined me still serving tables, going nowhere in life. Let them think that. I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd never cared anyway. I was studying for my business management final when Emma's message popped up on Facebook. There she was, grinning beside a brand new red Mercedes, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Look what Mom and Dad got me for my birthday. Not that you'd know anything about nice cars, huh? Still serving burgers? Must be fun watching everyone else live their best life while you're stuck being a waitress forever. The next photo was of her college acceptance letter. Got into State U. Mom and Dad are paying for everything, tuition, housing, meal plan. They even promised me a spring break trip to Europe. But hey, at least you get free fries with your shift meal, right? I stared at my textbook, then back at her message. I could have told her about my 3.9 GPA, about how I was about to graduate with honors. Instead, I clicked block user and went back to studying. 3 weeks later, I graduated with my business degree. Only Grandma was there to watch me walk across the stage, but that was all I needed. We went out for dinner afterward, at a different restaurant, of course. Back at work, things started changing. Mr. Peterson, the owner, called me into his office one morning. Brittany, we've noticed how hard you work. How would you feel about becoming shift manager? You know this place inside and out, the staff respects you, and you've got the education for it now. That was just the beginning. 6 months later, I was promoted to floor administrator. My salary doubled, and suddenly I could afford to move out of the tiny apartment I shared with Maria. Years passed, and I kept climbing. By 30, I was running the whole place. The Silver Spoon had transformed from a regular downtown restaurant into one of the city's top dining spots. My name was on restaurant industry magazines, but my family still thought I was just a waitress. My new apartment was in one of those fancy high-rises downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. Every morning, I'd stand there with my coffee, watching the sunrise, thinking about how far I'd come from that scared teenager who ran away with just a backpack. It was a quiet Monday morning when I got the Facebook message from Mrs. Roberts, our old neighbor. We'd kept in touch over the years. She was one of the few people from my old life who'd been kind to me. She'd often slip me cookies when Sandra was being particularly harsh, and once even helped me hide my mom's photo album when Sandra wanted to throw it away. Brittany, honey, I thought you should know. Emma's graduating next week, and she's planning something nasty. She's made reservations at the Silver Spoon. She knows you work there. She's been bragging to everyone about how she's going to have you wait on her table. Says it'll be hilarious to have her college dropout sister serve her graduation party. She's invited all her snobby friends and even some of our old neighbors. She's been telling everyone how she's going to show them what a failure you turned out to be. I thought you should know. I sat back in my leather office chair, looking out over the restaurant floor, through the one-way glass. The lunch rush was just beginning, and I watched my well-trained staff move efficiently between tables, like a perfectly choreographed dance. A slow smile spread across my face as I opened our reservation system. Sure enough, there it was, Emma Wilson, party of 15, Saturday 7 p.m., graduation celebration. She'd even added a special note requesting the best table in the house, price is no object. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could cancel it. One click, and their reservation would disappear. I could have Janet call with some excuse about a plumbing emergency or a double booking. But no, I had a better idea. I picked up my phone and called Grandma, who answered on the second ring. She was probably in her garden. She always kept her phone close while tending to her prized roses. "You'll never guess who's coming to dine at my restaurant," I said when she answered. "Who?" "Emma. And Dad and Sandra. They're coming to celebrate her graduation. Apparently, she specifically chose this place to humiliate her waitress sister. Mrs. Roberts just warned me about it." Grandma's voice turned sharp. "Cancel their reservation. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life, Brittany. Haven't they hurt you enough?" Actually, I couldn't help grinning as I looked at the framed Businesswoman of the Year award on my wall. "I have a better idea. How would you like to come to dinner that night? I'll give you the best table in the house, behind the marble column by the waterfall wall. You'll be able to see everything, but they won't see you." There was a pause, then Grandma started laughing, that deep, mischievous laugh that always meant trouble when I was growing up. "Oh, you devious girl. Count me in. Should I wear my pearls for the occasion?" "Perfect. I'll have Carlos make your favorite chocolate souffle. He's been practicing that new raspberry sauce you liked last time." "I'll bring my camera," Grandma chuckled. "This is going to be better than those reality TV shows you used to watch." After we hung up, I called in my assistant. "Janet, clear my schedule for next Saturday evening. And make sure the staff knows I'll be handling a special table personally." "Of course, Ms. Wilson." "Anything else?" "Yes," I smiled, running my finger along the spine of my business management degree diploma hanging on the wall. "Make sure we have our finest champagne chilled. And have Miguel prepare his special caviar appetizers. I have a feeling it's going to be quite a memorable night." As I looked out over my restaurant again, I couldn't help but think how perfect this was. Emma had always loved her little power plays, her attempts to humiliate me. Well, this time, she was walking right into my territory. And I was ready. Saturday evening arrived, and the restaurant was buzzing with its usual weekend energy. I watched from my office as my sister's party arrived, Emma in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, Sandra in her typical overdone makeup, and Dad looking older than I remembered. They were surrounded by Emma's friends, all dressed to impress. I could see Grandma at her hidden table, pretending to read the menu while watching everything. She gave me a subtle wink when I passed by. "Excuse me," Emma's loud voice carried across the restaurant. "I specifically requested my sister, Brittany, as our server." "Where is she?" I smoothed down my tailored suit jacket and approached their table. Emma's face lit up with malicious delight when she saw me. "Oh my God, everyone, this is my sister I was telling you about." She gestured at me like I was some exhibit at a zoo. Still a waitress after all these years. I mean, I just graduated from State U, and she's still carrying plates. The table erupted in laughter, led by Emma. Dad chuckled too, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Sandra just sat there with that superior smirk I remembered so well. "Look at her clothes," Emma stage whispered to her friends. "I guess that's what you can afford on a waitress's salary." I stood there in my Armani suit, letting them laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What can I get for you this evening?" I asked professionally. Emma made a show of studying the menu. "Well, since you asked, I'll have the lobster thermidor." "Oh wait." She looked up with fake concern. "Can you even afford to eat at a place like this? Do you know what lobster is?" More forced laughter from her friends, though some were starting to look uncomfortable. And after dinner, Emma continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "I want you to personally wash our dishes." I'll even give you a nice tip, maybe you can buy yourself some decent clothes for once. I could see Grandma gripping her table's edge so hard her knuckles were white. Some of the guests were whispering among themselves, clearly embarrassed by Emma's behavior. Sandra finally spoke up, her voice cold. Really, Brittany, you should be grateful Emma chose your establishment for her celebration. Though I must say, I'm surprised they hired someone like you at such a nice place. Actually, I said, my smile never wavering, I won't be able to take your order or wash your dishes tonight. Emma's face darkened. What do you mean, you won't? I want to speak to your manager right now. I'll have you fired. That won't be necessary, I said calmly. The manager is already here. Well, where are they? Emma demanded, looking around. You're looking at her. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad's face had gone completely white, and Sandra looked like she'd swallowed something sour. That's impossible, Emma finally sputtered. You're lying. You're just a waitress. Actually, came a familiar voice, she's not just the manager. She owns 30% of this restaurant now. Grandma rose from her hidden table and walked over, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The look she gave Dad could have frozen hell over. While you were busy spoiling one daughter and crushing the other, I put Brittany through college. She worked here as a waitress during the day and studied business management at night. Every single success she has, she earned herself. Emma jumped up, her face red. That's not fair. You're lying. She's nothing but a successful businesswoman who owns part of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants? Grandma cut in. Who bought her own luxury apartment while you're still living off Daddy's money? Is that what you were going to say? Dad finally found his voice. Mom, Don't you dare, Mom me, John Wilson, Grandma snapped. You let that woman turn you against your own daughter. You gave away Brittany's college money her mother left specifically for her. Well, guess what? I'm making things right. I've already changed my will. Everything I own goes to Brittany. Every penny. Sandra shot up from her chair. You can't do that. Emma is your granddaughter too. Emma has had everything handed to her on a silver platter her entire life, Grandma replied coldly. She doesn't need my money, though from what I've seen tonight, she could use some basic human decency. Emma completely lost it. She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it across the table, shattering plates and sending food flying. This isn't fair. You're all just jealous of me. Security, I called calmly. 2 men in black suits appeared instantly. Please escort these people out. You can't throw us out, Sandra screamed. Do you know who we are? Yes, I do, I replied. You're trespassers causing a disturbance in my restaurant. Leave now, or I'll call the police and press charges for the damage to my property. Emma tried to grab another plate, but one of the security guards caught her arm. Dad just stood there, looking lost, as they were all led to the door. Brittany, he called back weakly. Please, can we talk? I turned my back and walked away. Over the next few months, he tried everything, calls, emails, even showing up at the restaurant once. I had security turn him away. That was 5 years ago. The Silver Spoon is now the top-rated restaurant in the city, and I've opened 2 more locations. Grandma kept her word about the will, though thankfully she's still going strong at 75, tending her garden and coming to the restaurant every Sunday for her chocolate soufflé. Last week, I got another message from Emma. Something about how she's changed and wants to make amends. I did what I always do with messages from that part of my life, hit delete and went back to work. Some chapters are better left closed. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Chicago, my life was pretty straightforward. My dad, Tom, spent 30 years on the police force before retiring, and my mom, Sarah, still works as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary. They gave me everything they could, but we were never wealthy. I'm Tasha Mitchell, well, I was before I became Tasha Reynolds. After graduating from college with an accounting degree, I landed a job at Anderson and Partners, a mid-sized accounting firm. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and I thought that would be my life. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October when I literally bumped into Marcus outside Starbucks. I was rushing to get my morning coffee before work, and he was heading to some important meeting. My coffee spilled all over his obviously expensive suit, and I wanted to die right there. "I'm so sorry," I started dabbing at his jacket with napkins. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." Instead of getting angry, he laughed. "Don't worry about it. Though you could make it up to me by having dinner with me tonight." That dinner turned into another, and another. Marcus was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was the son of James and Victoria Reynolds, owners of Reynolds Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But he never made me feel less than him. He loved that I came from a real family, as he called it. That all changed when he took me to meet his parents at their mansion in Lake Forest. I'll never forget Victoria Reynolds looking me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "So, Tasha," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Marcus tells us you're an accountant?" "Yes, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How practical," she said with a thin smile. "And your parents?" When I told her about my dad being a retired cop and my mom a school secretary, you'd think I'd said they were professional criminals. James Reynolds barely looked at me during dinner, speaking only to Marcus about work. When he proposed 3 months later, I said yes without hesitation. His parents attended our wedding with frozen smiles and stiff congratulations. I thought I could win them over with time. I thought love would be enough. After our honeymoon in Bali, Marcus and I moved into his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. The place was bigger than my parents' entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I felt like I was living in a dream. 2 months after we married, I discovered I was pregnant. Marcus was ecstatic, spinning me around our massive living room when I told him. Even Victoria and James seemed to soften a little at the news, though Victoria couldn't resist saying, "Well, at least the child will have good breeding on one side." Our son, James Jr., Marcus insisted on naming him after his father, was born on a snowy December morning. The moment I held him, nothing else mattered, not Victoria's constant criticisms, not the whispers at Reynolds Industries parties about the accountant who married the boss's son. JJ, as we called him, was perfect. Those first 2 years were actually good. Marcus took to fatherhood like a natural, coming home early to play with JJ, reading him bedtime stories, taking us both to the park on weekends. He was thriving as financial director at Reynolds Industries, and I worked part-time from home as an accountant while taking care of JJ and our home. Victoria and James might not have liked me, but they doted on their grandson, showering him with expensive gifts and demanding regular visits. But somewhere around JJ's 3rd birthday, things started to change. Marcus began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse, "Big project at work, honey." You wouldn't understand. The man who used to rush home to see his son now barely made it for bedtime. Then came that Thursday when Victoria showed up unannounced at our apartment, her Hermes scarf perfectly arranged, despite the wind outside. "Would you care to explain," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, "why you weren't at the company's annual gala last night?" I stared at her, confused. "What gala?" "Don't play dumb, Tasha. The Reynolds Industries anniversary gala. Every executive and their wife was there, except you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know about any gala. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "Are you telling me my son lied?" I waited up that night, sitting in our dark living room until Marcus came home at 11:30. He loosened his tie as he walked in, stopping short when he saw me. "Why didn't you tell me about the gala?" I asked quietly. He sighed, pouring himself a scotch. "Look, Tasha, let's be honest. You wouldn't have fit in. You're too simple for these events." The other executives' wives, they know how to carry themselves. They can discuss art and wine and summer homes in the Hamptons. What would you talk about? Your dad's police stories? Your mom's adventures in the school cafeteria? I felt like he'd slapped me. I'm your wife, Marcus. You're supposed to be proud of me, not ashamed. I was proud, Tasha. When we were dating, your simplicity was charming. But I'm the financial director now. I need a wife who can be more. I went to bed crying that night, telling myself he was just stressed from work, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It was a Tuesday when my world fell apart. Marcus had texted that he was working late again, and I was doing my usual cleaning routine around the apartment. When I got to his home office, I noticed his laptop was open on his desk, screen still bright. I'd never snooped before, I trusted him, despite everything. But something made me pause this time. Maybe it was the way the screen showed his email was open, or maybe I was just tired of all the lies. I sat down at his desk, and that's when I saw it, an email thread with someone named Sophia Loran. My hand shook as I started reading. There were hundreds of messages between them, going back months. Sophia was apparently a new marketing executive at Reynolds Industries, hired about a year ago. As I scrolled through their correspondence, my stomach turned. Had dinner with the village idiot again, Marcus had written. God, I can't believe I have to go home to her. Sophia's response, poor baby. Don't worry, I'll make it all better tomorrow. They talked about me like I was a joke, the simple-minded wife who didn't know her husband was sleeping with someone else. There were pictures of jewelry he'd bought her, weekend trips they'd taken while he'd told me he was at business conferences. I stayed up all night, copying everything to a USB drive, printing key emails, taking screenshots. When Marcus finally came home at 7 a.m., his shirt wrinkled and his tie loose, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out in front of me. Care to explain? I asked, holding up one of the printed emails. How could you do this to me, to our family? He laughed, actually laughed. Come on, Tasha. Did you really think you were enough? Sophia is everything you're not, sophisticated, sexy, exciting. When's the last time you even tried to look good for me? I've been taking care of our son while you've been screwing around. Look, he said, pouring himself a coffee like we were discussing the weather, here's how this is going to work. You'll stay my wife, on paper. It's better for my image at the company. Sophia understands. And hey, he added with a nasty grin, maybe I'll even find time for you occasionally. If you're lucky. I ran to JJ's room, my hands shaking as I threw some clothes into a backpack. JJ was still sleeping, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I gently woke him up. Baby, we're going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a while, okay? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching us. You'll be back. Where else could you possibly go? I picked up my son, grabbed the backpack and my purse with the USB drive, and walked past Marcus without a word. Through tears, I drove to my parents' house. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. The divorce papers arrived 3 days after I left. Victoria Reynolds personally delivered them to my parents' front door, wearing a satisfied smirk. I always knew you weren't good enough for my son, she said, handing me the envelope. I'm just glad he finally realized it too. But what came next was worse than anything I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just filing for divorce, he was suing for full custody of JJ. His lawyer filed papers claiming I was an unfit mother, painting a picture of me that was completely false. Your Honor, Marcus's expensive lawyer said during our first hearing, Mrs. Reynolds has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. She drinks heavily, creates scenes of jealousy without cause, and has become unstable. Thank God I'd saved all that evidence. When my lawyer presented the email correspondence between Marcus and Sophia, showing his infidelity and his cruel comments about me, the judge's expression changed. The timestamps on the emails proved I hadn't been creating scenes, I hadn't even known about the affair until I found those messages. "So, Mr. Reynolds," the judge said, reviewing the evidence, "you claim your wife is unstable, yet these emails show you were the one deceiving her, gaslighting her?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. The judge awarded me primary custody of JJ, with Marcus getting every other weekend and substantial child support payments. I went back to work full-time at my accounting firm, while Mom and Dad helped with JJ. They were amazing, turning their retirement years into full-time grandparent duty without a single complaint. We settled into a routine. It wasn't luxury living anymore, but it was honest and peaceful. Then came that Saturday morning when a black Range Rover pulled up in front of my parents' modest house. Marcus stepped out, and with him was Sophia, tall, blonde, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I'm here to see my son," Marcus announced, pushing past me into the house. Sophia followed, her nose wrinkled as she looked around our living room with its worn but comfortable furniture. "Oh my God," she laughed, picking up one of Mom's cherished family photos. "This place is literally a dump. Like an actual kennel." "Watch your mouth," I warned her. She turned to Marcus. "Baby, you can't let your son stay in this hovel. And these old people?" She gestured toward my parents, who stood shocked in the doorway. "They belong in a ditch somewhere, not raising a Reynolds heir." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my parents' house right now." "Or what?" Marcus sneered. "You know what, Tasha? I'm done playing nice. I'm going to take JJ, and I'm going to destroy you. You think you won in court? Just wait." I shoved them both toward the door. "Get out." "Come on, baby," Sophia purred to Marcus. "This place probably has fleas anyway." As they drove away, I hugged my parents tight. Mom was crying, and Dad looked like he wanted to punch something. But watching that Range Rover disappear down our street, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. The next night, Dad found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. "You know, sweetheart," he said, sitting down across from me, "sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Remember Mike Sullivan? He worked with me on the force. Now he's a private investigator. Real thorough guy, knows how to dig deep without leaving traces." I thought about Sophia's smug face, about her cruel words about my parents, about all the nasty emails she kept sending me. Just that morning, she'd commented on my LinkedIn profile photo, "Look at this pathetic wannabe. Can't even afford decent clothes anymore?" Marcus wasn't any better. His latest email had read, "Every time I pick up JJ and see you in that dump, I remember why I upgraded. Enjoy playing poor with your cop daddy." "How much does Mike charge?" I asked Dad. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small office downtown with Mike Sullivan, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd known me since I was a kid. Weeks passed. I focused on work and JJ, trying to ignore the constant stream of harassment from Marcus and Sophia. Then Mike called. "You need to come to my office," he said. "You're going to want to see this in person." The file he handed me was thick. "First off," he said, "Sophia Loren isn't her real name. She's using her sister's identity. Her real name is Carla Larson." As I read through the file, my hands started shaking. Before working at Reynolds Industries, Sophia had been an escort, moving from rich man to rich man, living off their money until they got tired of her or discovered her small-time scams. She'd had different names in different cities, always disappearing just before things got too hot. But what she was doing at Reynolds Industries was far worse. "Look at these bank transfers," Mike pointed out. "She's been siphoning money from company accounts, small amounts that wouldn't raise red flags. And these emails?" He showed me screenshots. "She's been selling company information to your in-laws' biggest competitors. Product launches, merger plans, everything." I sat back, my mind racing. The perfect, sophisticated Sophia Loren was nothing but a con artist. And she'd gotten her hooks into not just my husband, but the entire Reynolds empire. There's one more thing, Mike said, pulling out another folder. Remember that big deal Reynolds Industries lost last month? The one that cost them millions? Sophia sold the bid information to their competitor 3 days before the deadline. I gathered all the evidence carefully, making multiple copies. But I didn't make a move. Not yet. Because now I knew something Sophia didn't. Timing is everything. The call from Victoria came on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was as cold as ever. Tasha, James's 60th birthday party is this Saturday, she said, like she was scheduling a root canal. While we'd prefer to keep this a family-only affair, JJ should be there for his grandfather's birthday. And since he's too young to come alone. She let the sentence hang there. Just remember, you're only being invited as JJ's escort. Try to stay in the background and not embarrass anyone. The party starts at 7. James Reynolds' 60th birthday party was exactly as ostentatious as you'd expect. The mansion was decked out in gold and crystal, with waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. I felt every judgmental stare as JJ and I walked in. "Oh, you came," Victoria said, her smile tight. "Well, JJ darling, come give grandmother a kiss." I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table, watching my son being paraded around like a show pony. The other guests either ignored me or whispered behind their hands. I clutched my large purse containing Mike's file, waiting. Then Marcus walked in with Sophia on his arm. She was wearing a red Valentino dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds dripping from her ears. "Everyone," Marcus announced, clinking his glass. "I have an announcement to make." He pulled Sophia closer. "I'd like you all to meet my future wife, Sophia Loren. She'll be joining the Reynolds family officially next spring." Victoria rushed forward to embrace her. Finally. A woman worthy of the Reynolds name. Harvard educated, from a wonderful family. Unlike some people, James added, shooting me a look. Sophia preened under their attention. "I just feel so blessed to be joining such an esteemed family. And I promise to be the kind of wife Marcus truly deserves." That was my cue. I stood up, my hand steady as I pulled out the file. "Speaking of what people deserve," I said loudly, "I have a few things to share about the future Mrs. Reynolds." "Tasha," Marcus warned, "don't make a scene." I pulled out the first document. "Tell me, Sophia, or should I say Carla Larson? How's your sister feeling about you stealing her identity?" The color drained from Sophia's face. "What is she talking about?" Victoria demanded. "Oh, did she not mention that she's been living under her sister's identity? The real Sophia Loren is a schoolteacher in Minnesota. This woman," I pointed at her, "is Carla Larson, former escort and con artist." "She's lying," Sophia shrieked, but I was already laying out the evidence, photos, bank statements, police reports. "And here's my personal favorite," I continued, pulling out more documents. "Bank transfers showing how she's been stealing from Reynolds Industries. And look at these emails, she's been selling your company's secrets to Wagner Manufacturing and Collins Corp. For months." James Reynolds snatched the papers from my hands. "The Wagner deal, the Collins merger, it was you?" "I can explain," Sophia stammered, backing away from Marcus's thunderous face. "The real Carla Larson," I said, enjoying every moment, "has quite a history. 7 different cities, 7 different wealthy men, 7 different scams. Looks like Reynolds Industries was going to be number 8. The room had gone deadly quiet. I watched their faces change as they read through the evidence, Marcus's confusion, Victoria's horror, James's growing rage. And Sophia, her perfect mask cracking as her house of cards came tumbling down. The elegant birthday party dissolved into chaos within minutes. James Reynolds's face had turned an alarming shade of purple as he read through the evidence. "Get out," he roared at Sophia, who was still trying to stammer excuses. "Get out of my house before I have you arrested right here." "James, darling," she attempted, reaching for his arm. "These are all lies, I can explain everything." "Explain?" He shook the documents at her. "Explain how you cost us the Wagner deal?" That contract was worth $20 million. And Collins? They were our biggest competitor, and you've been feeding them everything. Victoria, who'd been quietly reading through the escort service records, looked up with pure venom in her eyes. You common prostitute, she hissed. You thought you could con your way into our family? Sophia backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. Marcus, baby, tell them. But Marcus looked like he might be sick, staring at the photos of Sophia, or Sophie, with various wealthy men over the years. If you're not off my property in 30 seconds, James said, his voice deadly quiet, I'm calling the police. And trust me, you'll be seeing plenty of our lawyers either way. After Sophia fled, James turned to his son. The party guests were pretending to be absorbed in their champagne, but everyone was watching. You brought this woman into our company, James said. Gave her access to confidential information. All because what? She was pretty? Had nice legs? Dad, I didn't know. Exactly, James roared. You didn't know? Didn't check. Just thought with your, he glanced at JJ and modified his language, with everything except your brain. You're fired, Marcus. Clear out your office by tomorrow. But Dad. And that apartment you're living in? Company property. Find somewhere else to live. Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to me. Tasha, she said, and for the first time ever, her voice held genuine emotion. We owe you an apology. A significant one. You saved our company from God knows how much damage. James nodded solemnly. We were wrong about you. Very wrong. You've proven yourself more worthy of the Reynolds name than. He glanced at Marcus, others. 3 days later, Sophia was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with what Reynolds Industries lawyers found once they started looking, was overwhelming. She was facing serious fraud charges and massive fines. Marcus, I heard, was staying at a friend's condo while he looked for a new job. No other financial firms were eager to hire a man who'd been fired for such catastrophic negligence. It's been 6 months since James Reynolds' birthday party changed everything. I'm sitting in my new apartment, not as luxurious as the one I shared with Marcus, but perfect for JJ and me. The Reynolds family gave it to me as a token of appreciation for saving their company from Sophia's schemes. The least we could do, James had said, handing me the keys. After everything, well, you understand. The apartment is in a nice neighborhood, close to good schools. JJ's room is decorated with superhero posters, and my little home office overlooks a park. It's not a penthouse with lake views, but it feels like home in a way the luxury apartment never did. Marcus moved to California last month. He calls JJ every Sunday at 7 p.m., like clockwork. Their conversations are short. JJ's still too young to talk long on the phone, but at least he's trying to be a father, even from a distance. He never asks to speak to me, and that's fine. Some bridges stay burned. The biggest change has been with the Reynolds family. Victoria stops by at least once a week, usually bearing gifts for JJ and, surprisingly, for me too. Last week, she brought a beautiful orchid for my windowsill. The real shock came when Victoria and James invited my parents over for dinner. I was nervous. The last time they'd all been in the same room was at my wedding, where the class divide had been palpable. But something had shifted. I watched in amazement as James asked Dad about his years on the force, genuinely interested in his stories. Victoria and Mom talked about gardening, exchanging tips about growing roses. Sarah, Victoria said to my mom at the end of the evening, you and Tom raised an remarkable daughter. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. We always knew what Tasha was capable of, Mom replied with quiet dignity. Sometimes it just takes others a while to catch up. Life isn't perfect. I still have days when I miss the man I thought Marcus was, when I worry about JJ growing up with a long-distance father. But then I look at my son, happy and healthy, playing with his grandparents, all his grandparents, and I know we're going to be okay. Last night, I found JJ looking at an old photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day. "Do you miss Daddy?" he asked. I sat down next to him, pulling him close. "Sometimes," I said honestly. "But you know what? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it goes wrong before it goes right. The important thing is to stay true to who you are." Later, as I tucked him into bed, I thought about how far we'd come. From the simple accountant the Reynolds family once scorned, to the woman who saved their company. Sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's better.